All right, so gather round close. The air's getting a chill to it, even though it's not exactly cold out. But sometimes the deepest kind of cold isn't about the temperature at all. It's about a feeling, a knowing, a sense that something just isn't right. Some places hold on to secrets, buried deep in the earth or hidden behind the trees, things that maybe shouldn't ever see the light of day. The woods especially, they can feel ancient, like they remember things we've long forgotten. And sometimes those memories stir. About a month or so ago, I was walking my boyfriend's dogs on some trails near the beach. He has two big dogs. One is a husky chow mix. The other is a pit bull, what we affectionately call a hippo, because of her solid build. Both of them are usually loving, sweet, social, and completely chill. This particular trail leads down to an estuary. It starts in a state park area, but the trailhead only has 2 parking spots, so it's almost always deserted when I go there. There's a maintained trail that goes directly to the estuary, and then there's an unofficial trail that loops off the main one and comes back to it later. This loop trail is harder to spot and pretty overgrown, but I can tell I'm not the only one who uses it. I was walking the dogs on the main trail, just getting close to the estuary, which is where we usually stop for a bit to watch the birds. Suddenly, one of the dogs, the husky mix, started a low growl. His fur along his spine puffed up into a full mohawk. We live in an area with bears and cougars, so that's the first place my mind went. A surge of adrenaline went through me. I carry a small pistol with me when I'm hiking alone, just in case. I drew it, keeping it pointed downwards but ready, and started backing up the trail slowly, pulling the husky back with me. The pit bull was still clueless, watching a squirrel nearby. I'd only taken a few steps back when a creepy guy stepped out from behind a tree just off the trail. He wasn't physically scary looking. He looked like a typical outdoorsy person you might see at one of the craft breweries in our state. Maybe late 40s or early 50s. The tree he stepped out from wasn't huge. He would have had to deliberately position himself behind it to be hidden when I was approaching. He started walking towards the growling, clearly upset dog. He was smiling, talking to the dog in the strange, soothing voice, his hand out like he was going to pet it. But the dog was barking loudly now, growling in a way I hadn't heard him before. It was unfamiliar, terrifyingly aggressive. At this moment, my pit bull finally noticed what was happening and stopped watching her squirrel friend. She took in the scene, the strange man, the upset husky, me backing away. Her usual calm demeanor vanished. She immediately moved, positioning herself between the man and me. She didn't puff up or growl at first, and I wasn't sure what she was going to do, but her tail was rigid, held at a weird angle, and she bared her teeth at him, a silent, fierce display. I don't know if it was the pit bull's suddenly threatening posture, or if the creep caught a glimpse of the firearm I was holding down by my side, but his expression changed instantly. The amicable hiker facade dropped away, replaced with a look that made my skin crawl. It was pure malice. He stopped walking, didn't move another step, and didn't say anything else. He just stood there, at the edge of the trail, maybe 20 feet away, staring. It was incredibly creepy. "Don't you come near me," I said, my voice shaking slightly. We started backing away more quickly now, moving back up the main trail. This time I made sure he saw the weapon in my hand as I turned and backed away. When I got to the part of the main trail where the unofficial loop trail branched off, I took it. I glanced back quickly to see if he was following, but he was still standing where he had stopped, staring after us. The dogs were incredibly tense now, on high alert, their bodies rigid. I eventually slowed down, partly to listen, and partly because I'm not exactly a small person, and I was starting to get winded from backing up the hill with two big dogs. The loop meanders widely around the area and is probably about a quarter of a mile longer than the main path, which is maybe a mile long in total. As I was nearing the point where the loop trail rejoined the main path again, my good boy, the husky, started to growl once more. It was a very low growl this time, thankfully quiet enough that the man wouldn't hear it if he was nearby. I stopped and listened. I heard footsteps on the main trail heading back towards the estuary. He was walking that way. As soon as he was out of sight, we booked it. We ran the last 100 yards or so of the loop trail, crashing through the undergrowth back to the trailhead parking lot. My Jeep was there, and parked next to it was a dark-colored SUV. Its hatch was open. It hadn't been open when I'd gotten there. I tried to see the license plate, but I couldn't because it was on the open hatch. I wasn't willing to take the extra second to pull the hatch down just to check. I basically threw my pit bull into the back of my Jeep. She's 90 pounds of solid muscle, a small hippo, as noted before, and I was pretty proud of how fast I got her in there. My husky hopped right in after her. I jumped into the driver's seat, started the engine, and took off. Right as I turned onto the road, pulling out of the trailhead parking lot, my pit bull barked. A single, loud bark. That was the first and only time in the 6 months I had known her that she had ever barked. My best guess as to what happened is this. As soon as I was out of sight on the loop trail, he started to follow me. But he didn't know about the unofficial loop path. He stayed on the main trail, which was shorter, and got back to the trailhead ahead of me. He saw my Jeep was still there and opened his hatch. Maybe to rate, or maybe to put something inside, or maybe to look inside my car for something. Reasons that couldn't be good. When he heard me coming back on the loop trail, he raced back, and that's when my very, very good girl, the pit bull, saw him and let him know exactly what she thought of him with that single, powerful bark. I swear, that bark sounded like it contained every swear word I know. It was off-season, so the state park office was barely manned at all. I drove away shaken but safe, thanks to my instincts and my dogs. I never reported it directly. I wasn't sure what I would even say that the police could act on. A guy looked at me weird, and then my dog barked. But I know what I felt and what I saw in his eyes. The memory of that encounter, the sudden shift from casual hiker to pure malice in his expression, the way my dogs reacted, and the bizarre detail of the open hatch stays with me. It was a chilling reminder that even on a quiet, deserted trail, in the middle of the day, you can encounter something deeply unsettling. And sometimes the most terrifying things aren't the wild animals, but the people. I grew up in a quiet rural area back in the 70s. My friend Joe and I were always outside, especially in the big woods that bordered his family's farm. My parents would drop me off some mornings, and we'd basically live outdoors all weekend, only coming back inside when school started again. We loved pretending we were pioneers, building shelters, setting up traps, trying to make fire without matches. We spent countless hours lost in the trees, knowing every creek and hill. When we got into high school, we got this idea from a movie we'd seen. We wanted to walk the old railroad tracks that ran far out into the countryside. Instead of looking for anything grim, though, our plan was to find old bridges to fish from and set up camp a little ways off the tracks. We knew it wasn't exactly safe, and we were probably trespassing, but we were teenagers and it felt like a grand adventure. We had a lot of fun on those trips. We found hidden rivers, discovered forgotten bridges, spent hours fishing, and learned how to duck and hide whenever we heard a train approaching. At night, we'd camp in the woods just off the tracks, keeping our fires small and out of sight. Nothing bad ever happened. It was peaceful, almost perfect. We did it multiple times and never ran into trouble. After high school, Joe and I went our separate ways, moving to different towns for work. But we always stayed in touch, making sure to visit each other whenever we could. One summer, in the mid-90s, our schedules lined up and we were both back home for a couple of weeks. We'd spend our days with family and then meet up in the evenings, sometimes at a local bar, sometimes just sitting around a fire at Joe's house, talking about the old days. One night, the conversation drifted back to our railroad adventures. The mix of nostalgia and a few beers led to a spontaneous decision. We'd take a walk on the rails again. Just a day hike, camp for one night, and walk back the next day. We started out early the next morning. My wife dropped us off at the old spot where we used to begin our trips, right outside the edge of town. She thought we were crazy, and she made sure she knew it as she drove away. Joe suggested that instead of walking the route we usually took, we should head in that opposite direction, just for a change of pace, a little more adventure. We felt confident. We knew the general area. We had a basic map. I said, why not? And we set off. The day felt good. It was fun, a little bittersweet, remembering our younger selves. We found an old bridge, sat on the edge for a while, just watching the water below, and then kept going. We didn't bring fishing gear this time, just some canned food and other supplies for the night. As late afternoon turned to dusk, we started looking for a place to camp. We found a spot in a thick section of woods bordering the tracks. The trees were so dense on either side, it felt like walking through a long green tunnel. We had brought small hammocks to sleep in, but before setting them up, we did what we always used to do, a quick scout of the area. We'd walk a little ways into the woods, maybe 100 yards or so, just to make sure we weren't about to set up camp in someone's backyard. We climbed a small hill nearby, thinking if we didn't see any houses from the top, we'd be fine. But when we reached the crest of the hill, we saw something down in the valley below, maybe 100 yards or so into the trees. It was hard to see clearly through the leaves, but it looked like an old building. We stopped and debated, what was it? An old hunting cabin? A storage shed? We both thought it was maybe an old sugar shack, something used for maple syrup production, because there didn't seem to be any clear road leading to it from where we were. It looked quiet, no lights, no sign of anyone besides the old church. It was just there, in the middle of nowhere. We left immediately, walking quickly back up the hill to the spot we had chosen for our camp. Having the hill between us and the old church made us feel a little better, but the sight had left us both feeling uneasy. We tried to shake it off, telling ourselves it was just the natural creepiness of finding an abandoned building deep in the woods. It was getting dark now, almost night. We decided to just hang our hammocks, eat some cold food, and try to get some sleep so we could leave early in the morning. Night settled in, wrapping the woods in thick darkness. We were lying in our hammocks talking quietly when we both heard it, a sound coming from the direction of the church. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. "Yeah, what is that?" Joe replied. It sounded like people singing, low, distant, but definitely singing. Not bird calls, not the wind, human voices. We both slid out of our hammocks and crouched low, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two. The singing continued, but it didn't seem to be getting any louder or closer. Finally, unable to stand the not knowing, we decided to creep back up the hill for another look. We moved carefully through the trees, the old skills coming back to us, how to step without snapping twigs, how to navigate in low light. The moon was barely visible, providing just enough faint light to keep us from walking straight into a tree, but it was mostly pitch black. We didn't dare use flashlights. When we reached the top of the hill, we saw a light in the distance. It was faint, flickering, coming from inside the church, and the singing was definitely coming from there. We huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. "Can you believe this?" we murmured to each other. The light looked like candlelight, flickering like that. We listened, trying to understand the singing, but we couldn't make out any words. It sounded like old church music, maybe, but in a language we didn't recognize. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was inside, but we only saw occasional indistinct shadows moving within the flickering light. We had no intention of getting any closer. We were a football field's length away, and that felt like a safe distance we very much wanted to maintain. The singing went on for a while longer, and then it stopped abruptly. After a moment of silence, a single voice began to speak, a booming male voice. It was like a preacher, the kind you'd hear in old movies, loud and full of authority. I was already freaked out by the singing, but this voice was genuinely unsettling. And again, it sounded like he was speaking in a language we didn't understand. Gibberish, but delivered with intense conviction. Eventually, the voice stopped. Then a new pattern began. The single male voice would say something, and then the group of voices from inside the church would answer in a kind of call and response, like a congregation chanting. This went on for some time, growing steadily in intensity. Then it shifted again. The chanting stopped, and they all broke into a long, sustained wail. It wasn't a cry of pain, exactly, more like a deliberate, drawn-out sound of something ancient and mournful, perhaps. It kept getting louder and louder and more disturbing until it felt like it was vibrating through the ground and the trees. It was so loud, so unnatural, that I found myself instinctively covering my ears. Just as I was about to whisper to Joe that we needed to get out of there immediately, he put a hand on my shoulder, his grip tight. "They're coming out," he hissed. From our position on the hill, we couldn't see them clearly, but we could see figures walking out of the open doorway of the church. They came out in a line, holding hands, walking in single file, and they were holding lights now. Not candles, but brighter, more direct lights. Flashlights, maybe. As they walked out, they started singing again. The same strange, wordless song from before, and the lights they carried began to move. They started walking away from the church, but not towards the railroad tracks. They were moving towards the hill where we were hiding. The lights bobbed and swayed as the line of figures moved slowly but steadily through the trees. Panic surged through me. We scrambled down the hill as fast as we could, back to our campsite. We didn't bother rolling up the hammocks or carefully packing anything. We just grabbed our bags, leaving things scattered, and ran for the railroad tracks. Once we were on the tracks, we started running, heading back the way we had come earlier that day. After a few minutes, gasping for breath, we stopped and looked back. We could see the lights from the church now, coming out of the woods and moving along the edge, closer to the tracks, closer to us. They were moving erratically now, bobbing quickly, like whoever was holding them was running or searching. We kept running and walking as fast as we could along the tracks, pushing ourselves until our legs burned and our lungs ached. Eventually, we stopped seeing the lights behind us. We kept going until we finally came across a road. We checked our basic map. We were only about 15 minutes of walking away from the edge of our town. We walked the rest of the way, exhausted and shaken. We reached a 24-hour gas station on the edge of town and called my wife to come and pick us up. We tried to explain what happened, but she and our friends just thought we'd been scared by some local kids messing around. But I heard those voices. I heard the chanting and the wailing, and I saw those figures walking out of that abandoned church in the middle of the night, holding lights and moving towards us. Whatever they were, whatever was happening in that church, it didn't feel like kids playing a prank. It felt ancient, wrong, and deeply terrifying. I'm still not sure who or what those people were, but it was definitely the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me out in the woods. Living out in the countryside has its own unique rhythm. There's a connection to nature, a quiet isolation that most people never experience. I remember one place we lived, an old farmhouse surrounded by plenty of land. It was out there, far from anything really. One of the things you learned living there was to read the subtle signs of the woods, the quiet language of the wild things. For instance, you'd learn about the cougars. They were out there. You could always tell when one was moving through the area, at night. It started with the nearby sounds. The distant lowing of cows might cut off abruptly. Then, closer in, the natural sounds of the night would just stop. The bats would vanish from the air, their silent flight suddenly absent. The foxes hunting in the fields would fall silent. Even the tree frogs and the crickets, usually a constant chorus, would go quiet. It was like a wave of audible darkness, a silence that wasn't peaceful, but tense, alert. Everything was hiding from the big cat moving silently through their world. Then there were the feral hogs. They were big, unpredictable, and surprisingly stealthy for their size. A solo boar wandering at night created a similar kind of silence, a localized pocket of unnatural quiet that settled over the land. It was a different feeling than the cougar's silence, less fearful, more watchful, dangerous in a different way. We often let our dogs run loose at night for exercise on the property. They were tough, working dogs, not afraid of much. Sometimes they'd come back with a raccoon or an armadillo they'd chased off, but one particular night they came tearing back to the back porch at full speed, scrambling up the steps like they were being chased by something truly awful. These dogs feared almost nothing. They were fearless, stubborn, driven. So when they ran from something, I knew it was bad. It wasn't a squirrel, wasn't a rabbit. It was something that made them abandon their usual bravery and bolt for safety. When that happened, I knew instinctively to head inside for a handgun. This night, they were panicked. They were barking, yes, but it wasn't their usual aggressive, alert barking. It was a frantic sound, a sound of pure terror. My wife was right behind me, and the dogs were circling, looking out into the yard towards the fence, barking as if they saw something, but it was strange. It was the opposite of seeing something. They were barking at the absence of something under the chain link fence. We walked out onto the porch, me first, then my wife. The dogs were still barking, fixated on the fence. And then I saw it. Stuck under the chain link fence was a feral hog. Not a small one. This thing was enormous, like a black, bristly boulder. It was as big as a small car, maybe even a bass boat, just wedged there, struggling against the wire mesh. It grunted a deep, powerful sound that vibrated in my chest. My old dog, despite the earlier panic, took a step off the porch, hackles raised again. I told my wife to get back inside the house and stay there, that I'd be right behind her. The hog was looking at me. Its eyes were small, dark, and intelligent in that massive head. And I was looking at a lot of potential ham. But right then, it was pure danger. It had already uprooted the concrete posts holding up that section of the fence. It was strong, desperate to get free, and trapped. I started backing away, slowly, one careful step at a time, towards the porch. If I had tripped, if I had fallen, it would have been on me in an instant. It could have eaten me, just like I eat its relatives. That thought was unsettling, primitive. When I reached the porch, my wife was standing by the door, holding the firearm ready just as I'd asked. I told her to keep it, to have it ready in case I went missing. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, nothing happened, right? The pig was gone the next day. And you'd be right. Nothing happened right then. The next day, I went out to assess the damage to the fence. The hog was long gone. The fence was mangled, pulled up from the ground, a section completely ruined. The only other sign of its presence was a scattering of coarse, black bristles caught in the torn wire. Some things in life you just wish you did erase from your memory. That night, that immense, trapped hog staring at me from under the fence, and the terrifying silence that the dogs reacted to before it appeared, it sticks with me. It was a stark reminder that out there, just behind our comfortable little world, were things wild and powerful, things that could uproot the very foundations of your perceived safety. And sometimes they came right up to your doorstep. Some memories just burrow deep, ones you wish you could forget, like one cold night in England around the time I turned 20. It was early September, and I was going through a rough time. A painful breakup had left me feeling lost and restless. I needed to get out of my room, out of the house, but I didn't want to go to my usual spots. They reminded me too much of my ex. So I decided to visit the lake. My grandfather was connected to the property somehow. He'd given me a key to the tall gates. It was about the same distance away as my usual haunts, but felt strangely different heading in that direction. As I unlocked the heavy gates and stepped inside the property, I immediately felt it. I was completely alone. This wasn't what I expected. I had thought there might be fishermen, maybe even late swimmers, but there wasn't a single soul around. This particular night was a Sunday afternoon, technically. The lake was closed to the public. Now, realizing I had a key and not wanting to go home, I decided to explore the woods bordering the lake. I started walking through the trees, keeping away from the water's edge. As the sky darkened, the lake's surface turned black, reflecting the fading light. Seeing that huge body of water, on the verge of freezing in the autumn air, filled me with a sense of dread I couldn't explain. It was foolish of me to have started out so late, waking up late, leaving the house late. I had completely lost track of how fast it gets dark this time of year. After maybe 15 minutes of walking, the woods felt thicker, darker than I expected. I turned around, deciding to head back the way I came. Or at least, I thought I did. But after another 20 minutes, panic started to set in. I was looking around for the distinctive green gates I'd come through, and they were nowhere in sight. My heart pounded. Thoughts raced through my mind. I was lost. It was getting seriously dark. I might have to spend the night out here alone and terrified. The sky became alarmingly black overhead. My family would be wondering where I was. It was all too much. I had to stop. I sank onto a dead tree log I found in the middle of the dark, unfamiliar woods, trying to catch my breath and compose myself. It became clear that my best chance was to try and find a path, any path, that might lead me back. So I stood up and started walking off in a random direction, pushing through the undergrowth. Then, all of a sudden, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of twigs snapping behind me. Someone or something was back there. My blood ran cold. I hesitated, my heart hammering in my chest, but a terrible curiosity, or maybe just the pure fear forcing me to confront it, made me turn back. What I saw was without a doubt the most horrific sight I have ever laid eyes on. Where I had been sitting on the log just moments before, a figure sat. A man. His body was rigid, his arms stuck out at shocking, unnatural angles to his sides. It was impossible to tell if he was clothed. His entire body, head to toe, was caked in a thick, white powder. It looked like chalk dust, clinging to him, obscuring any features. His hair was also indistinguishable, hidden under the same chalky coating. The only things I could clearly see were his eyes, which were wide open, bulging, staring, and his mouth, which was gapped open in a sickening, unnatural way. We stayed like that, perfectly still, frozen in that moment. This silence of the woods seemed to press in around us. Then the terrifying stillness was shattered. The man let out a horrendous hacking cough. Plumes of the white dust erupted from his mouth, hanging in the air for a second before drifting down. Something inside me screamed, "Get out, now!" I turned and ran, as fast as my legs could carry me, away from that horrific sight, away from the sound of that choking cough. I didn't look back. I ran blindly through the trees, desperate to find anything familiar. And then, almost miraculously, I found it. A path. And very soon after, the gates. They were tall, just as I remembered, but I didn't fumble for the key. There was no time. I scrambled, clawed my way over the top, dropping onto the other side, my body shaking. When I got home, I tried to explain to my parents what I had seen. It took a while to calm down, to make sense of the jumbled, panicked words. My mother listened patiently. Later, she told me that the lake, like many lakes in the area, was originally a quarry. Miners worked there, mining chalk in dangerous conditions. She mentioned the possibility that miners could have been crushed to death in cave-ins years ago. That was years ago, but I have never been so scared in my life as I was that night, and I will never go back to that place. For as long as I live, the memory of the chalk-covered man sitting on that log, his eyes wide open, his mouth gaping, and that awful, dusty cough will stay with me. Some places hold secrets, and some secrets are best left buried. About 5 or 6 years ago, I traveled with several friends. maybe 7 or 8 of us in total, to a small village to attend a friend's wedding. The ceremony was scheduled for fairly late, around 9 p.m. The village was about 100 kilometers away from where we lived, so we left after work, around 6:30 p.m., hoping to get there right on time. Traffic wasn't too bad, and we managed to arrive around 9:30. By then, we were all pretty hungry, so we decided to eat dinner first before going to the ceremony. Indian weddings usually last for a long time, often going well past midnight, sometimes even till 2 a.m. or later. It was winter, and the wedding was being held outdoors. It was quite cold. We ate quickly and then decided that since most of us had to work the next day, it would be best to head back home early, skipping most of the ceremony. We had 2 cars for the trip. One was an SUV driven by my friend Rahul, and the other was a larger wagon-type vehicle, which I was driving. We left the village and got back onto the highway, keeping a safe distance between the 2 cars. As we drove, we were all aware of the unsettling reputation of this particular highway. There were many stories about accidents that had happened here and tales of people seeing strange, unexplained things late at night. It was known as a potentially haunted road. After about half an hour of driving, the highway suddenly narrowed, and we found ourselves surrounded by thick trees on either side. We had clearly entered a forested area. The road became a simple 2-lane path, just wide enough for 2 cars to pass each other going in opposite directions. We were driving at a steady speed, maybe between 80 to 100 kilometers per hour. Suddenly, just ahead of me, my friend sitting in the passenger seat and I saw something. It was a figure, low to the ground, that seemed to run out from the right side of the highway. It was moving incredibly fast. It went directly in front of the first car, the SUV. As it passed the SUV, we saw the car shake like it had hit something hard. But Rahul, driving the SUV, didn't stop. He just kept going. In a matter of seconds, we reached the exact spot where we had seen the figure run across the road. I slowed my car down instinctively, trying to see what it was that had caused the SUV to lurch. My friend and I looked out the car windows, scanning the road ahead, the sides, but there was nothing there. The road was empty. I told my friend to call Rahul in the SUV. He called him and handed me the phone. I told Rahul not to stop the car, just keep driving, and we would pull over at the next intersection or town to grab some tea and talk. About 20 minutes later, we reached a small gathering of shops and stopped. We all got out, the cold air biting at us, and immediately started talking about what had just happened. I turned to Rahul and asked him, "So, what happened back there? Your car shook." He looked puzzled. He said, "I don't know. It felt like a cat ran out of nowhere and hit the car. It was really fast." My friend and I exchanged a strange look. A cat? We didn't see a cat at all. My friend spoke up. "Dude," he said to Rahul, "we saw something totally different. We saw a lady as she ran out towards the car and she passed through it. And when we got there, she was gone." A dead silence fell over us. We looked at each other, standing under the faint lights of the roadside shops, the wind whispering through the nearby trees. None of us had any explanation. It was just what we saw versus what they felt. We saw a figure like a lady, a phantom image that seemed to phase through the physical world. They felt an impact, like hitting a solid object, like a cat. It was deeply unsettling. 2 cars, moments apart, the same spot on the road, 2 completely different, impossible experiences. We talked about it for a while, trying to find a logical answer, but there was none. The image of that figure running into the path of the car and then simply vanishing was burned into my mind. Later, I did some research online about that highway. It turns out it is widely known as one of the most haunted places in that region of India. People have reported all sorts of strange occurrences there, sightings of figures, unexplained accidents. I don't know what we saw that night. Maybe it was the same thing, perceived differently by each car. Maybe it was something else entirely. But the memory of it, the sheer impossibility of what we witnessed, still sends a shiver down my spine. The highway was dark, the trees were close, and for a few moments, something that shouldn't have existed crossed our path. Living in a condo complex felt strange after growing up in the quiet parts of the world. My unit had a small backyard, maybe 10 feet deep, and then it dropped off into a large wooded hill or plateau. We got a lot of snow in this area during the winter, which meant the trees were mostly tough, hardy pine or oak. They could handle a lot of moisture, but were also built to survive dry spells. This is the setting for something that happened a few years back. It was late spring. I decided to go explore in the woods behind the condo, something I did regularly to get a little peace and quiet. It was a little muddy at the base of the hill from recent rain, but the trees looked healthy, their leaves bright green. There were no signs of insect infestation or disease that could have caused such rapid decay. There were no obvious animal tracks large enough to suggest something had simply pushed them over, especially not snapping them so cleanly halfway up. And the drying out happened too fast for any natural process I knew of. I stood there staring at the damaged trees, feeling a profound sense of unease. How could healthy trees snap like that overnight? How could they dry out so completely in just a couple of days? It defied logic, defied nature as I understood it. I've never been able to figure out what happened that night. The memory of that loud cracking in the dark and the sight of those broken, desiccated trees the next morning still bothers me. Something unnatural happened in those woods. Something powerful and fast. It wasn't just a storm, wasn't just animals. It felt intentional. I wish I knew what had torn those trees in half and drained the life from them so quickly. I still look at that hillside sometimes, especially when the wind blows, and wonder what kind of force could do something like that, and what else might be out there in the dark. I used to dog sit for a family friend, Terry and John. They preferred to have someone stay at their house with their dogs rather than leave them alone. I grew up in a town where the middle of nowhere was just nowhere, and I loved the countryside, so staying at their place felt like a mini vacation. I lived in the city now, always busy, so having time out there felt like a luxury. Their house was genuinely isolated. When I say middle of nowhere, I mean it took me 2 hours to get there from my job, and it was about 45 minutes to the nearest town or highway entrance. The only neighbor was Steve, who lived directly across the street, about 5 miles away. In my hometown, having a neighbor meant you had someone nearby if you needed help. But Steve did nothing but make me feel deeply unsafe. I arrived at Terry and John's place, and they were giving me the rundown: when to feed their 2 super cute, very spoiled Australian cattle dogs, how to water the plants, usual stuff. As they were loading their bags into the car, Terry said, "Oh, don't forget to tell her about Steve," nudging John. John just shrugged it off. Oh, yeah, don't worry about the neighbor across the street. He's harmless. Drinks a lot, a little off, but totally harmless. He's lost his license so many times, all he can do is drive a little moped in the town. Then he added, just in case though, this is where we keep the firearm. Steve had 3 "Don't Tread on Me" flags and 2 plain Confederate flags hanging from his porch. Yeah, a little off. Felt like an understatement. John showed me where the gun was. He explained it was loaded and said if I needed to use it, I just had to pull the trigger extra hard. At this point, I was thinking, okay, whatever you say, but also wondering about the necessity of such instructions, especially since the police would take at least 45 minutes to get out here. Still, I wasn't overly worried. I dealt with drunk, weird people before. I thought I knew how to handle them. I genuinely loved being out in the quiet, and I had 2 protective dogs that would respond instantly to a command to defend. I felt reasonably safe. Terry and John left around 3 p.m. I took the dogs out, played some frisbee to tire them out, and started bringing my stuff inside. I was staying for a week, so I had work clothes, my laptop, and my gaming console to keep me busy in the evenings. As I went back for my second load of bags from the car, I heard Steve across the street. He slammed his door and started yelling, seemingly having a loud phone conversation. At first, his voice was faint, but then I heard him yelling loudly, asking someone where they went. The dogs heard it too and started a soft, low growl. Calm down, guys. It's okay. Just Steve, remember? Probably wants some privacy. Let's go inside. As I grabbed my stuff from the car, I heard him yell again, I do care about my kids. Then I heard something hit the unpaved road behind me. It turned out to be a cell phone. While I was bent over gathering my things, the dogs suddenly went crazy. They ran a few feet behind me, barking and growling viciously. I dropped everything, spun around, and saw Steve at the end of the driveway, maybe 50 feet away, just standing there, staring at me. I yelled at the dogs to calm down and come back to my side. They obeyed immediately, standing close to me, still tense. I gave Steve what I hoped was friendly wave. In my head, I was thinking, okay, this is weird, but he's probably just drunk. They said he's harmless. I'd dog sat before and never had any problems with neighbors. He then took a single step towards me. My dogs tensed, but stayed put. He spoke, his voice low, with a strange, manipulative tone. You all right? Steve was wearing dirty jeans, work boots, and a dirty red hoodie. A red hat with a Confederate flag was pulled low on his head. He had long brown tangled hair down to his shoulders and a beard that looked about 5 inches long, also dirty. Yeah, I'm pretty good, I replied, trying to sound casual. My name is Pip, just dog sitting for Johnny and Terry this week, getting them all in for the evening. How about yourself? He stood there, in silence, for about 30 seconds. He just stared. It felt like a very long time. Then he spoke again, his voice flat. You all right? I'm Steve. Nice to meet you, Steve. Thanks for being a good neighbor and checking on me, but like I said, I'm good. Getting the dogs inside now. He took another step forward. Hey, you, all right. This time, the silence lasted for probably a whole minute. I figured he was wasted and just fixated. I needed to get inside with my stuff. I turned back to my car, finished grabbing the bags. As I did, I heard him take another step on the gravel driveway. The dogs barked loudly again. I spun back around. Steve was still standing there, a little closer now. He was watching the dogs. He know them dogs, he said, a strange smile on his face. Them dogs won't do nothing to me. They some damn good dogs, that's for sure. A wave of unease washed over me. This wasn't just a drunk neighbor being friendly. There was something predatory in his gaze, in his words. I quickly closed the trunk of my car. I was about to just say, I'm going inside now, and walk away, but instead I fumbled for words. I'm war, he yelled. It was startling, sharp. Yeah, I'm going inside now, I said, trying to sound firm. Thanks for checking, Steve. I'm fine. I've got the dogs this week. Have a good night. I turned and walked quickly towards the side door, the dogs following close behind me. I didn't look back immediately. I heard Steve continue to stand at the end of the driveway for maybe 10 minutes, just staring at the house. This house didn't have a traditional front door. The main entrance was just a back door, and there was a side door that I was heading for. You couldn't see either one from the street because of a thick line of privacy trees in the front. You had to come onto the property to see them. It was about 6 p.m., and the sun was starting to go down, though it wouldn't be truly dark until much later, maybe 9:15 p.m. Inside, the dogs and I were on the couch. I had my gaming headphones on, trying to relax. Suddenly, the dogs went ballistic. They jumped up, barking and growling furiously towards the back door. What the hell? I muttered. They didn't do this unless someone unknown was pulling up in the driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart started pounding. I grabbed the large knife I always kept nearby when in unfamiliar places and cautiously moved towards the back door. The dogs were still going crazy, fixated on something I couldn't see. I peered through the window in the door, but saw nothing at first. Then I looked closer. There were moped taillights visible in the driveway near where my car was parked. It looked like someone was hiding behind my car. I tried to focus my eyes in the dim light. It was Steve. He was on his moped, ducking down behind my car, seemingly trying to stay out of sight, staring towards his own back house. No, he was staring towards my house, towards the back door area. I quieted the dogs, telling them easy, stay, and hid by the window, trying to see what he was doing. They continued to growl, but thankfully stopped the loud barking. I watched him for about 5 minutes. He just sat there in my driveway, staring in my general direction. I didn't think he could see me, but I wasn't sure. Then he shut off his moped and crouched down beside my car. Now I could see him more clearly. He was peeking into my car. I grew up in the country, and back then, people rarely locked their doors, not their houses, not their cars. But living and working downtown now, I always kept everything locked. He wasn't trying to get into my car, not yet anyway. He just walked around it a few times, not crouching anymore. He seemed to feel like he wasn't being watched, or maybe he just didn't care. He would take a single step, stop, look into my car, and then look at the house, and then repeat the process. It was incredibly creepy. He seemed to feel like he wasn't being watched, or maybe he just didn't care. He would take a single step, stop, look into my car, then look at the house, then repeat the process. It was incredibly creepy. At this point, I texted Terry and told her Steve was doing some really weird stuff and I was feeling very uncomfortable. She texted back quickly, "Call the cops if you feel unsafe. They know him. They can come talk to him. Remind me to tell you about the time he was standing out at the street at 6 a.m. when I was leaving for work. When we got back, we think he had a psychotic break." How comforting. I tried to rationalize it. He's just wasted. He's harmless, they said. But the way he was acting, the staring, the hiding, it felt wrong. I decided if he came any closer to the house, I would call. Looking back, that was a bad idea. The cops were so far away. I watched him finish his second round of looking into my car. He then got back on his moped and drove off. As he passed the window that faced a driveway, he sped up, like he was trying to make it seem like he wasn't just sitting there, like he was worried I might be watching him. It was about 8 p.m. The dogs went crazy again. I'd looked out. His moped was parked in plain view at the end of the walkway, maybe 30 feet from the house. He was standing there, staring at the house again, talking to himself. I had turned off most of the lights inside so he couldn't easily see me moving around. I saw him take a single step towards the house, putting him about 29 feet away. That was it. I went to where John had shown me the firearm. I calmed the dogs down again, that they were in full protective mode now. One on my left, one on my right, low growls rumbling in their chests. It was 8:15 p.m. I called the police. I explained the situation, mentioning that the owners thought he might be having a psychotic break. I was halfway through explaining why I was starting to fear for my safety when the operator interrupted. "Ma'am, what's your address again?" I told her. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're not located in our county. I'll have to transfer you to the next county over." "Are you serious?" I asked, bewildered. "The guy who's bothering me lives in your county. That's why I'm calling you." Despite my protests, she transferred me. The phone rang and a new operator answered with the standard 911, what's your emergency? I was silent for a moment, looking out the kitchen window. Steve had walked closer. He was now about 45 feet from the house. Ma'am, what's your emergency?" the voice on the phone prompted again. I explained what was happening, how I had been transferred. The second operator told me to remain calm and turn on all the lights. Screw that, I thought. The guy was probably waiting for me to do something predictable like that. "The doors are locked," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "and I have a firearm. If he enters, I will shoot." She reiterated that it was safest with the lights on. Against my better judgment, I flipped on the kitchen light. Steve noticed immediately. He got back on his moped and drove back across the street to his house. I told the operator what had happened. She asked if I still wanted an officer to come out. "Oh, yes, I wanted to come out," I stammered, frustrated. Apparently, the cops in the neighboring jurisdiction know him, but the lady transferred me to you. This is the third time he's come onto the property, and he's getting closer and closer to the door. I do not feel safe. Someone that is not me needs to talk to this guy. "Calm down, ma'am. We'll send someone. However, based on your location, it may take a while for someone to get out there." "That's fine," I said, relief washing over me. "Just please have someone out here as quickly as you can." I asked if she would stay on the line until they arrived. She said someone was on the way, but she needed to be available for other calls. She told me to call back immediately if he returned, and I felt uneasy. By this point, it was 9 p.m. The sun was almost completely set. The dogs went crazy again. Now I was beyond uneasy. I was getting angry. I grabbed the loaded firearm and started moving around the house, turning on lights in every room, making sure that if Steve was watching, he would see me, and he would see that I was armed. I looked out a window. His moped was parked across the street, but I didn't see him. Where was he? From the kitchen window, I couldn't see the back door. I went upstairs, one dog following me, the other was too old for stairs, and peeked through a window upstairs that overlooked the back of the house. Steve was on the back porch. My back porch. He was lighting matches and throwing them down onto the wooden deck. He didn't seem harmless anymore. He was talking to himself, twisting his head back and forth like he was psyching himself up for a fight, or maybe arguing with another personality. My hands were shaking, but I pulled out my phone and started filming him from the upstairs window, just in case, so they would know what happened, who had been here. The sun was completely down now. It was dark. He stepped up to the back door and started knocking. Then the knocking turned into pounding, hard, violent pounding. I'm usually pretty good at staying calm, but my heart was pounding so fast, my fitness tracker kept changing my heart rate display every few seconds. I held the gun ready. If he got in, I knew I would have to use it. Through the window, I could see his face briefly as he hammered on the door. There was pure hate in his eyes. Then, just as suddenly as it began, he stopped pounding. He turned quickly, ran off the porch towards his moped, started it up, and took off down the driveway faster than I thought that little vehicle could go. Not a minute later, a police car pulled into the driveway. I had mentioned to the dispatch operator that I had dogs, that they would bark at the officer but wouldn't attack unless given a specific command. and that I had a firearm I would leave inside when I went to meet him. I met the officer outside. The dogs barked once or twice, letting me know someone was there, but they didn't growl. I left the gun inside. I told him Steve had just taken off moments ago on his moped. "Oh yeah," he said, I think I passed him when I turned onto the road." I explained that the guy was either drunk or crazy, and if he saw him again, he should definitely pull him over because I was positive he was under the influence of something. Normal people don't act like that. The cop was fairly dismissive, shrugging everything off. He's like, "Well, are you going to stay here tonight?" I told him, "No, absolutely not. I would leave the dogs overnight and come back with my dad in the morning." Asked him to stay while I quickly packed up my essentials, and he nodded. I went inside, gave the dogs lots of love and treats, put them in their crates for the night, grabbed my bags, and left. The next day, I returned with my dad. We walked to the perimeter of the property together, trying to make it obvious that a male presence was there now. I'm a 24-year-old woman, by the way. As we were doing this, Steve, wearing the same dirty clothes and hat, holding a 24 case of beer, was standing at the end of his driveway again. He saw my dad on the other side of the yard, turned around, and walked back into his house. I later learned more about Steve from Terry and John. He'd been to jail multiple times for domestic abuse. His kids weren't allowed to see him because of his violent nature. And he somehow owned a four-wheeler, even though no one knew how he got money. Terry and John had never seen him leave for work. They only saw him leave on his moped or four-wheeler, empty-handed for an hour or two, and then return with cases of beer. I don't know who he thought I was that night or what he wanted. But every time he looked at the house, in my direction, there was pure malice in his eyes. Who knows what would have happened if I hadn't called the cops or if they had taken longer to get there. From now on, when I'm dog sitting, if a strange neighbor says hi, my answer is simple. Let's not meet again. The scariest night of my entire life involved a close encounter with a man who was later confirmed to be a murderer. It happened when my boyfriend and I were camping in the mountains. It ended with us running for our lives down the mountainside in the pitch black, clutching whatever we could find for protection. It was late 2018, our first real getaway together as a couple. We decided to go hiking and camping on a section of a long-distance trail in Virginia. We were young and naive. We thought it would be romantic to camp as far off the main path as possible, deep in the wilderness. We walked for miles into the forest, finding a spot where nobody had passed us all afternoon. It had just gotten dark. We were sitting by a small campfire, making s'mores, enjoying the quiet. It was twilight, the last bit of light fading from the sky. Suddenly, my boyfriend, who has excellent eyesight, saw a man approaching us slowly. He was creeping up on us through the trees. At first, my boyfriend thought it might be a park ranger coming to tell us our campfire was too big or in the wrong spot. I even started trying to hide the small amount of marijuana we had, thinking that was our biggest concern. So my boyfriend called out to him, "Hey, can I help you?" It was strange. The man didn't have any kind of light on him. He didn't have a backpack or any camping gear. Why was he out here, miles from anywhere, at night with nothing? After my boyfriend called out, the man sped up. He came walking right at him, fast. He had this strange look in his eyes, blank, empty, unsettling. He didn't answer. He just kept walking straight towards my boyfriend. When my boyfriend realized this was definitely not a park ranger, his hand went into his pocket where he had a concealed weapon. He made a point of putting his hand there, making it clear that he was armed. It was only after my boyfriend did that the man finally acknowledged us directly. "Oh," he said, his voice flat. I was just wondering, are y'all having a party? A party? Out here? We were miles from anyone. It was dark. He had approached us slowly, silently, without a light, with no gear. We didn't answer his question. Instead, we asked him what he was doing out here. He didn't answer. He just walked past my boyfriend and started moving towards our campsite. It was windy, so we had put up a tarp to shield the fire. This also meant that the man approaching couldn't see how many people were at our site, if it was just the two of us or more. He asked us again, "How many people you got with you?" His eyes were scanning the area behind the tarp. He started to circle our campsite slowly, peering around, checking us out. He asked again if we had anyone else with us. My boyfriend still didn't answer. He just kept circling our camp. Keep in mind, we had set up our camp on a very steep hillside. It was the only patch of ground flat for miles. But he told us he was going to set up camp nearby. He then proceeded to walk off in a direction straight up the hill where we knew for a fact it was impossible to set up a tent because of the rocky, uneven terrain. He was silent as he walked away. We listened to his footsteps crunching on the leaves as he moved uphill, completely off the path. He walked for about 30 seconds, and then his footsteps stopped completely. Silence. He was just still. We knew he was still there, somewhere in the darkness just above us, but we couldn't see him. By this point, it was fully dark. I was starting to get seriously freaked out. I tried not to show it, not wanting to seem like a coward. My boyfriend and I had a hushed conversation. We talked about whether we needed to leave. My boyfriend handed me a heavy metal utensil from our cooking gear. He said, "If anything happens, you run." At that moment, I knew this wasn't just me being overly anxious. He was truly worried. He said we needed to get out of there right away and just grab the absolute essential items. I was scared that this creep had plans for us, maybe with a firearm of his own. Later, my boyfriend told me I had a terrible feeling, the kind of feeling that this guy might prefer to use something sharp, not a gun. We packed up as fast as we could, leaving a lot behind. We started walking down the trail, running in the pitch black. We kept our flashlights off, trying not to give away our position. We ran like that for at least a mile. At one point, my boyfriend looked back and said he saw the man standing up on the hill, staring down at us. He ran behind me for a while, shielding me, protecting me as we fled. That experience stuck with me. It was terrifying. Even now, years later, I still can't think of a rational or non-threatening reason why that man was out there, deep in the woods, at night, with no gear, approaching campers the way he did. I've tried to come up with explanations, but none of them make sense. My boyfriend, who is now my husband, and I were talking about it last night. The memory was so vivid, I decided to type into Google to see if anything strange or violent had happened in that specific area of the trail around the same time we were there. And there it was, just a few months after our encounter, on the very same trail, an unhinged man with what articles described as crazy eyes approached some hikers around twilight just as it was getting dark. He behaved in a deranged and aggressive manner before stabbing a man to death with a 17-inch knife. A woman who was with the man ran for her life down the trail. The attacker chased her, caught up, and started hurting her too, but somehow she managed to escape and get help. The articles mentioned the guy kept wandering the trails after that.
even shouting at other campers, demanding a flashlight. All the details matched. The same area, the same time of day, the same description of the man, same age range, the same deranged eyes, the same strange detail about him not having a flashlight. The more articles I read, the more I realized this man had been roaming the hiking trails, harassing people for a while before the murder. Several different people had reported him, not just us. He was known to law enforcement along the trail for his erratic and violent behavior. His name was James Sovereign Jordan. We got incredibly lucky that night. It easily could have been us.
I had a really unsettling experience with my brother about 2 years ago. We had decided to go explore somewhere supposedly haunted during the day. There was this old cemetery in a town nearby that people said was spooky, so we drove out to check it out. We walked around the cemetery, looking at the old headstones. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. It was just a quiet old burial ground, so we decided to leave. The cemetery is located on a road that's also said to be haunted. This road leads up into the woods. The story is that a lady in white sometimes appears along this road and tries to hitchhike, hoping someone will pick her up. I had completely forgotten about this legend until after that day. So, we were driving down this road, and it eventually turned into a forested area a couple of miles past the cemetery. You can pull over to the side and find hiking trails that lead deeper into the woods. Since nothing had happened at the cemetery, we decided to hike one of these trails. I had totally spaced on the road being haunted, so I wasn't even thinking about anything paranormal. We started hiking the trail in the afternoon. After about 10 minutes, we came across some abandoned train tracks and a really old, barely standing bridge where the train used to run. It looked like something out of a movie, all rusted and overgrown. It seemed cool, so we decided to scramble down a steep hill right by the bridge that let you go underneath the collapsing structure. We went down there, messing around, looking at the old stone and metal work. After we had our look, we started climbing back up the steep hill that led back to the trail. It was a bit of a climb. The hill was pretty steep, and we had to use the trees and roots to pull ourselves back up. When we got back to the top, onto the trail, we were both a little out of breath. We stood there for a moment, catching our breath, when we both noticed it at the same time. We heard a voice. It sounded like a grown man's voice, but he was shouting and screaming. He sounded incredibly angry, full of pure rage. We both froze, quieting down, straining to hear more. The voice was very far away, almost sounding like it was echoing from the mountains around us. It had to be more than 500 feet away, easily. We looked at each other, unspoken questions in our eyes. What was that? We stood there listening for maybe 15 seconds, and then, the next thing we know, the voice came down the trail. Not from where we had heard it originally, far away, but from maybe 100 feet down the trail, heading towards us. The speed at which it covered that distance was unnatural. It was like it teleported or was moving faster than any human could run. I heard it coming down the trail, and my first thought was that it was someone incredibly angry about to hurt us. But the weirdest thing was, the voice wasn't speaking words I understood. It was just gibberish, shouting, screaming gibberish, full of intense rage. I couldn't make out a single recognizable word. Instantly, that fight-or-flight feeling exploded through my body. The voice was getting louder, closer, and it was moving with inhuman speed. I told my brother, "Grab some big sticks, we need to defend ourselves." Even though the voice came out of nowhere and moved unnaturally fast, my mind still tried to label it as a crazy person who was about to attack us. We each grabbed a heavy stick we found nearby and turned to run back down the trail towards the car. As we were running, the voice was coming from the other end of the trail, the direction we had just come from. And then, in an instant, I heard the voice right behind us. It sounded like it was no more than 10 feet away, chasing us down the path back to the car. Despite the terror, despite every instinct telling me not to, I turned my head to look back. I had to see how close it was. As I looked back and heard the voice yelling in absolute rage right behind me, I saw no one. The trail behind me was empty. "Run faster," I yelled to my brother. "It's literally right behind us, and there's nothing there." We started running even faster, our hearts pounding. And then the craziest thing I've ever experienced happened. The voice didn't just stay behind us. It started panning, like it was circling us. I heard it yelling its gibberish right behind me, then it slid to my left, sounded like it was just off the trail in the trees. Then the voice was suddenly right in front of us, blocking our path. Then it slid quickly to the right side of the trail and then back behind us again, all in about 10 seconds. It was like the sound itself was moving in circles around us as we ran. At this point, my brother and I were completely freaked out. This wasn't a person. This was something else. We ran the rest of the way back to the car, pushing ourselves as hard as we could. The voice kept following us down the trail. I remember after hearing it pan around us like that, hearing its enraged gibberish echoing through the woods, I started praying for help, for it to leave us alone. About halfway back to the car, the voice suddenly disappeared. It was just gone. We slowed down, exhausted, and tried to talk about what had just happened. I asked my brother if he had also heard the voice slide around us in circles like that. He said yes, he heard it too. At that point, I knew I wasn't hallucinating. It had been real. I asked him how the voice sounded to him. Gibberish, but like a man screaming in pure rage at the top of his lungs. He said that's exactly what he heard. We finally got into the car and drove the hell out of there as fast as we could. The car ride back was mostly silent. We were both just sitting there, trying to process what had happened. That's when I remembered the legend about the road being haunted. Not just the cemetery, the road. I had been down that specific trail alone a few months before this, and nothing strange had happened. This experience was one of the weirdest, most terrifying things that has ever occurred in my life. To this day, I have never been back down that road or that trail, and I never plan to. Everything I've written about that day is the absolute truth. People say the area, especially the mountains around there, is known for strange things, maybe even dark magic being performed. I don't know about all that, but I know what I heard and felt that day. It was real, it was terrifying, and it wasn't human. Please stay safe out there. This encounter happened years ago, back when I was still living in a tiny French village in the middle of nowhere. This part of mid-northern France is mostly known for its absolutely massive forests. My little village was right in the center of one, surrounded by trees on all sides. Most of the people living there were elderly. It was a very quiet, secluded place. The forest was huge. If you walked in one direction, it could take hours or even days if you went the wrong way to find any other towns or signs of proper civilization, aside from the occasional lone road cutting through the trees. Now, I don't want to make it sound all bad. The forest was beautiful, and I have many good memories of playing in it. But it was also very isolated, and I can only imagine the strange and mysterious things that happen under the dense canopy of leaves and branches every day. To get to school, my mother would drive my sister and me to the next town over. It was a short drive, maybe 15 minutes. But on this particular morning, early in spring, something happened just seconds after we drove off from our house. We were on a rather narrow, rarely used road that cut through the edge of the forest, and standing in the middle of the road was an elderly woman. She was wearing a nightgown which was splattered with mud. Her arms and legs had bruises, and she looked completely exhausted, beyond tired. She was barefoot, her feet blackened with mud and caked with streaks of dried blood. She didn't flinch or move as our car slowly approached her. She didn't show any signs of relief either when my mother stopped the car and got out to speak to her. The old lady seemed terribly confused. She didn't seem sure what to say or where to begin. For a moment, she just babbled sounds that didn't make sense. But after a few seconds, she started forming slightly more coherent sentences. She kept repeating that she had run all night. It was roughly 7:30 in the morning, and the sun had only just started to rise. She said she had run through the forest, not knowing where she was going. As she continued, it became clearer that she had been trying to escape something. She paused, catching her breath, trying to gather her thoughts. It was obvious that her mind was a mess. She was only just starting to piece things together. Someone, she said, had kept her locked up in a cellar. She didn't know where it was or how long she'd been there or who had locked her up, only that she had been kept in a cellar, that it was damp and muddy. She didn't remember how she got out. All she knew was that she found herself in the dead of the forest in the dead of night, so she ran as fast as her old frail body would let her. At this point, it seemed like she had said all she could say. Her frantic escape through the dark woods had led her to us, standing in the middle of that quiet road. I don't remember exactly what my mother and the old lady discussed next, but it resulted in my mother calling her old lady's son, who lived on the other side of our village. A few minutes later, her son arrived. After a brief, quiet conversation with my mother and the old lady, he told us that we should leave quickly. It felt strange being told to leave like that, but we got back in the car and drove off toward school. Fast forward a few days. I asked my mom if she ever found out what happened to the old lady after we left her on the road with her son. My mom somehow heard more details later. I'm not sure from whom. Apparently, a few men had broken into her house that night. They had eaten food, ransacked her home, and stolen some of her valuable possessions. She had apparently fled into the forest for cover, which was only a few meters away from her house. Now, if that wasn't unsettling enough, a few extra details about the story always bothered me. First, when we found her standing in the middle of that narrow road, it turned out she was standing right next to her own house. The burglars might still have been inside while we were talking to her. Her sense of time did seem distorted. Maybe she didn't realize how close she was. Secondly, there was no mention of the supposed cellar she said she had been kept in. Had that been a fearful delusion, a product of her panic and confusion after the break-in? Or had she really been locked up somewhere deep in the forest, only for no one to believe her story about it later? It seems unlikely, but out in that huge forest, you do sometimes stumble upon old, crumbling stone huts, ruins, forgotten structures.
Perhaps one of them had a dark, gruesome history no one knew about. Unfortunately, we never spoke to that family again, so we never did find out what really happened that night. The elderly lady has since passed away, I believe. We will probably never fully know the truth about that cellar, about her escape, but nonetheless, whenever I return home to visit and drive past that house on the narrow street, I can't help but remember the image of the frail lady standing alone in her muddy nightgown, looking lost and terrified, just seconds away from her own home.
I worked as a camp counselor for 5 summers. It was a fun, demanding job, but there was a long-standing tradition among some of the older staff. On some nights, after all the campers were asleep and the younger staff were settled, a few of us would sneak out, quietly drive into town, and just kind of hang out like teenagers trying to get away with something. One night, a group of 5 of us decided to go. We pushed the car around a bend in the parking lot first, away from the staff cabins to avoid making noise and waking up the other adults. Then we hopped in and headed down the country roads toward the nearest town. We spent a few hours there getting fast food, teaching one of the guys how to drive a stick shift in an empty parking lot. Just being silly, enjoying the freedom away from camp. It was about 3:30 in the morning when we started driving back. We were laughing, joking around, listening to music, feeling tired but wired from the late night. Then we turned down a random, unfamiliar road, and the mood in the car shifted instantly. Something felt off. As we started down a slight hill on this new road, the surface changed. It went from smooth asphalt to rough gravel, and then quickly to just dirt. The road got narrower. The trees felt closer. Then we started seeing things along the sides of the road. A rusted boat trailer lying on its side, piles of rotting wood, old tools scattered around. Just a general mess of forgotten junk. We reached the bottom of the hill. In front of us was a large shed with a wide-open garage door revealing only darkness inside. Next to it was another small shed, looking like it was made just from plywood, with its door slightly creaked open. And through the crack of that open door, we could see a light. It was shining faintly, flickering. Right outside that door was a small fuse box attached to the wall. The car went silent. The joke stopped. For a moment, we all just sat there, engine idling softly, staring at the flickering light in the crack of the door. The air outside felt heavy, still. None of us said anything out loud, but we could all feel it. Something didn't feel right about this place, especially not at 3:30 in the morning. To try and break the tension, to ease the growing sense of unease we all felt, we started making nervous jokes, egging each other on the way teenage boys do. "Go on, dare you to go turn off the light," someone whispered. "Go open the door." And then, as someone dared one of us to go to the shed, the door creaked open wider. We didn't see anything inside, not clearly, just the light and the door moving slowly on its own, but that was enough. The next few moments are a blur of frantic movement and adrenaline. I can assure you that was the fastest that early 2000s sedan has ever driven. We reversed violently, spun around on the dirt road, and booked it back up the hill, away from that flickering light and that opening door. All 5 of us were mostly silent during the 15-minute drive back to camp. The laughter was gone, replaced with a tense quiet. Something about the aura of that place, that road, that shed, it had felt deeply wrong.
To this day, when I close my eyes and remember sitting in the front seat of that car, staring at the light and the door, I get an uneasy feeling in my stomach. Was someone behind the door? Were they waiting? Why were they there with a light on in the middle of nowhere at 3:30 in the morning? The door just creaked open, just enough to see the flickering light, and that was more than enough to make us turn and run.
I grew up and lived in rural New England for most of my life. That meant that when I was in high school, if my friends and I wanted to go see a movie, it wasn't a quick trip. We had to drive about 45 minutes to the nearest theater in a bigger town. One night, my friend and I decided to do just that. We went to see some action movie. I don't even remember which one, maybe something with a lot of explosions. On the way back home, it was late. I decided to take the back roads. These roads wound through the countryside, often unpaved, cutting through miles of forest and mountains. They were fun to drive fast on, but also scary as hell if you didn't know them. They were often barely more than 1 lane wide, dirt tracks with sheer drops off the side in places, and houses were few and far between, maybe one every 5 miles if you were lucky. So we were on one of these roads. The radio was playing rock music. It was snowing, but not heavily and not just a light dusting either. It was a soft, steady, pleasant snowfall, the kind that covers everything in a beautiful white blanket. We were about halfway home, deep in the woods. We came to a hill. At the top of the hill, the road curved sharply, making it a blind corner in the middle of the forest, with the snow reducing visibility even more. I slowed down significantly, being careful. We rounded the corner, and my headlights swept across the side of the road. They illuminated a spot where the snow wasn't falling. It was just hovering there, in midair. And standing right in that spot where the snow wasn't falling was a person. The snow was building up on their shoulders and head, collecting on them, but it wasn't falling down around them like it was everywhere else. It stayed like that for a second or two, long enough for me to register what I was seeing. The person standing there, the clear space around them, the snow accumulating on them while it hovered everywhere else. Then the snow that had built up on their shoulders and head suddenly collapsed, sliding off them, and the hovering snow around them started to fall like normal. The person just seemed to stand there, and then they were gone from view as we drove past. I kept driving for a while, my mind racing. I was silent, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen, trying to find a rational explanation. It had to be some kind of trick of the light or the snow or my tired eyes. Then I turned to my friend. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice tight. "Oh my God," he replied, sounding shaken. "I thought I was hallucinating." We described what we had seen to each other. The person, the spot where the snow wasn't falling, the snow collecting on them and then collapsing. We had both seen the exact same impossible thing. We couldn't just leave it at that. We turned around and drove back up the road. We went back and forth over that spot multiple times, driving slowly, trying to see if we could see the hovering snow again, or if there was anything about the location, a hidden overhang or a strange wind pattern, anything that could explain what we had witnessed. There was nothing. The snow was falling normally everywhere. There was no person. There was absolutely nothing to explain the bizarre sight we had both seen. The memory of that night,
The dark woods, the quiet snowfall, and the impossible sight of the hovering snow around that silent figure on the side of the road is still as vivid and unsettling now as it was then. We never found an explanation, and honestly, I don't know if I want to. It was a brief, strange moment, a glimpse of something that didn't follow the rules of the world I thought I knew.
When I was a child, my parents had a business running cabins in the middle of nowhere. People would rent them out for short periods, then leave, and it was my parents' job to make sure they were cleaned and ready for the next renters. The location was very remote. The nearest town was a 40-minute drive away, which meant getting groceries or going to school was always a trip. But my parents loved being out there, surrounded by nature. I was an only child back then. My parents were far too busy with the business to even consider having more kids, which I understand better now that I have a child myself. It was out in this isolation, this middle of nowhere, that my love for nature really grew. There were so many interesting things to see and explore. Since my parents were often busy and couldn't give me constant attention, I spent a lot of time wandering the woods by myself. They had a few simple rules. Don't come back too late, which usually meant before sundown, be home for dinner, and a few others. There was a part of the forest I absolutely loved. It was a trail I had made myself over time, walking it so often that the path was worn down. I tried to keep it hidden, my own private slice of heaven, my place of tranquility and peace. My parents knew about it, but they hardly ever went there unless they needed to find me urgently. One day, I was walking down my trail. I had started trying to build a small den out of sticks. Finding the right sticks was surprisingly hard, and at 12 years old, I wasn't exactly a master builder. But I enjoyed gathering materials, trying to create a makeshift shelter where I could read my books, listen to music, or just sit and observe the animals without being disturbed. It was a summer day, prime time for cabin rentals, but I was just relaxing on my lawn chair by my den in the middle of the woods. That's when I heard rustling sounds further up my trail, coming towards me. I looked up and saw a man stumbling his way through the trees along the path. He was big, with a beard, and very, very tall. He let out a sharp cry of pain as he pricked himself on some of the brambles growing near the edge of the trail. My path was perfect for someone my size, but for a taller person, some parts were a little tight or overgrown. As he approached me, he asked me what I was doing there. His tone had a strange quality, almost like he owned these woods, like he had the right to question me. I didn't know if this was public land or if someone actually owned it, and I started to feel a little scared. What if I was supposed to be here anymore? I asked him who he was. He replied that he indeed owned this part of the forest. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering, and asked again what I was doing. I told him I was sorry, that I just liked coming here. I didn't want him to think I was doing anything wrong, like building something on his property. He looked down at the pile of sticks I had gathered. "What are you trying to do there?" he asked. I told him I was trying to build a little den. He laughed, and for a moment the conversation felt lighter. He said that when he was younger, he also liked building dens in the woods. I asked if it would be okay if I kept trying to build mine. He gave a little nod and said it would be fine. That's when things got creepy again. He added a condition. "How about," he said, stepping a little closer towards me, "you let me play with you now and then you can keep coming back to your den. No problem. No questions asked." I didn't really understand what he meant at first. I thought maybe he just meant playing together, building the den, but I was starting to get very scared already. A
Part of me wanted to just bolt and run, but I also really wanted to keep coming to my secret spot. I felt torn. I looked up into his eyes, and I will never forget the look I saw there. It was a hungry look, almost predatory, like I was his prey and he was tracking me, ready to devour me. My heart stopped. He said, his voice low, taking another step closer towards me, "I really enjoyed playing with little girls." At that moment, the world seemed to freeze. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew with absolute certainty that I needed to leave now. I bolted. Without another word, I turned and ran. I left my lawn chair, my sticks, a few other things I had brought. I just ran. I ran as fast as I could, my legs pumping, pushing through the trees back towards home. It usually took me about 14 or 15 minutes to walk back. That day, running in pure terror, it took me about 7. I arrived home, bursting through the door, panting, babbling incoherently to my mom about a man in the woods. She calmed me down slowly over the next 10 minutes. Finally, I was able to ask her, "Mom, does the forest belong to someone?" She looked confused. "The forest? No. Honey, it's part of the cabin site. Your dad and I own all of this land. Anyone can walk through the woods here. It's part of the business." Relief washed over me for a second. Then I asked, "So, who was the man who said he owned the woods?" She gave me a strange look. "What man? What did he look like?" I described him in detail. The big size, the beard, the dirty green-plaid shirt he was wearing. As I described him, my mother's face went pale. She got a very strange, worried look. She walked away, saying, "I'll be right back, honey. Just wait here, okay?" She went to find my dad, who was cleaning another cabin, getting it ready for renters. They had a quiet conversation, their voices low. Then they came back. My dad looked at me, his face serious. He asked me to confirm if it was really the guy I was telling my mom about, repeating some details I had given him. I said yes, it was him. They looked at each other again. Then my dad just smiled, a strained smile, and said, "Don't you worry about it. Everything is fine." And that was the end of the conversation. They wouldn't talk about it anymore. I never saw the man again, and I was incredibly grateful for that. But a part of me always wondered who he was. Sadly, I was too scared to go back into the woods into my favorite spot for about 2 years after that. When I finally did go back, I had to make my trail again. It had grown over. As I got older, my interest started to shift away from building dens and exploring alone. I focused more on hanging out with friends. But I still used the woods sometimes, a place to chill, or sometimes I'd go there with my buddies. This story does have a resolution years later. It wasn't until I was much older, maybe 20, and that spot had become a regular place for my friends to hang out, that we were all sitting there one night telling each other scary stories. My best friend, Ashley, was telling a story about something spooky that had happened to her. And being in the exact spot where it had all occurred about 8 years earlier, I decided to tell my story about the creepy man to her and the rest of my friends. They all looked shocked. "What?" they asked wide-eyed. "What did he look like?" I gave them a brief description. One of my friends went quiet for a second. She said she didn't remember his name, but later that evening, she went back to her house and got online. The next day, she showed me a picture. This was back when cell phones were new and sending pictures cost money, but she sent it. When the picture came through, I knew. Immediately, it was him. It was the man from the woods. She had been doing some searching online based on the details I gave. It turned out he was a predator who had been active in our area and neighboring towns years earlier. He was eventually caught and convicted after being found guilty of something terrible involving a young child. He was sent to prison Learning that, seeing his face, knowing what he had done, I can't describe the feeling. Realizing how close I was that day, how much danger I had been in, alone in the woods with him. The memory of his hungry, predatory eyes, his words came flooding back with chilling clarity. I can't believe how close I came to something awful. It was a stark reminder that even in the quietest, most beautiful places, there can be darkness hiding. In any case, I never want to meet him or anyone like him again.
A few years back, maybe 5 or 6, my girlfriend and I decided to go camping for a night, just to get away from things, spend some time in nature. We lived in an area with fairly large woods nearby, and it had become a habit for us to go out and explore them on weekends for exercise. But this time, we planned to stay out after dark. We packed our gear in the morning and took a nice hike to a local creek that ran through the middle of these woods. It was pretty remote. We were the only people there. I wasn't completely sure about the rules for camping in that specific area, but my girlfriend said we'd be fine. So we set up our tent near the creek and started to settle in for the evening. We had a portable power bank for our phones, and luckily there was still a signal, which was good because I had a lot of social media scrolling to catch up on. It was getting late, around 10 p.m. The sun had set completely hours ago, and it was dark outside. I was just waiting to go to sleep, snuggled up in our sleeping bag, but I was finding it hard to get comfortable on the hard, uneven ground. My girlfriend, though, she's a deep sleeper. Once she's out, she's like a rock. I lay there for a while, tossing and turning, trying not to disturb her. After a while, I felt hot and frustrated. I unzipped my sleeping bag, quietly unzipped the tent flap, and stepped outside, into the dark. I just needed to stretch my legs, maybe cool off a bit before trying to sleep again. But that's when I heard something strange. In the faraway distance, I heard what sounded like children's laughter. I looked around, peering into the thick darkness of the woods. I saw nothing. Pitch black. How could there be children out here in the middle of the woods at 10 o'clock at night? It didn't make any sense. I strained my eyes even further, trying to spot any lights far off that might explain the noise. There was nothing, just the dense, dark wall of trees. The laughter faded slightly, but the sound, combined with the isolation and the darkness, made me feel more anxious and wide awake than before. I decided I couldn't just go back in the tent now. I resolved to investigate, to see where the sound was coming from. Besides being creepy, it felt incredibly unsafe for young kids to be out here alone in the dark. So I started walking quietly in the direction where the sound seemed to be coming from. But the closer I thought I got, the further away it seemed to remain. The laughter would sound like it was just ahead, but when I moved forward, it would fade, sounding distant again. It was like the sound itself was moving away from me as I approached. After a while, the laughter stopped completely. The woods went silent, a heavy, unnatural silence. I stopped dead in my tracks. Something told me not to move, not another step. It was incredibly dark. I had to step carefully. Had I moved just a few more steps forward, I would have fallen. There, right in front of me, was a large hole, a ditch I hadn't seen in the dark. There was like a break in the ground, a place where trees didn't grow, maybe an ancient riverbed. It was strange, unexpected. Had the disembodied voices, the sound of children's laughter in the dark, guided me to this spot? Were they trying to lead me, to trick me into falling into that hole? Was it some kind of malevolent force attempting to influence my fate? I don't think I'll ever know for sure.
All I know is that I stood there, frozen by the edge of the unseen ditch, the silence pressing in, the phantom laughter gone. I made my way slowly back to the tent, my heart pounding. I didn't sleep a wink the rest of the night. I just lay there, listening to the sounds of the dark woods, the memory of the laughter and the near fall replaying in my mind. In the morning, I convinced my girlfriend we needed to leave immediately. I didn't explain exactly why. I couldn't find the words to describe the creeping dread, the impossible laughter, the strange hole. But she saw the look on my face, saw how shaken I was, and she understood that something had terrified me to my core. We packed up quickly and left. Some things are best left unsaid, or maybe they can't be explained at all. The memory of that night, the sound of children's laughter where there should have been no children, the strange feeling of being led towards danger in the dark, it stays with me. I haven't gone camping in those woods since.
I've worked as a camp counselor for several years. Last summer, I kept hearing about this specific spot far from the main camp. It was called the Outing Spot, and it was located 3 creek crossings downstream from where we often took campers to cool off on hot days. This outing spot was pretty well known among the staff, mostly because of stories about a supposed abandoned meth lab trailer located nearby. There was talk of an old porcelain bathtub and burnt clothes found inside. People said there was an old bullet-riddled tag-along trailer about a 5-minute hike deeper into the woods from the spot. It just screamed something illegal, something dangerous. I'm an adventurous person, and I had been wanting to go explore this area since my first summer at camp, but it hadn't happened yet. Different things came up, and I had never made it there. There's some background about the camp itself. It's built around an old abandoned ranger station, deep in the woods. The story goes that the original ranger died there over 100 years ago, and now his ghost haunts the camp. People say he's friendly, that he just lets his presence be known sometimes and protects the camp like any good forest ranger would. There are supposedly official papers somewhere confirming this ranger existed, but I've never seen them. Our camp director is very spiritual. They've done cleansing ceremonies everywhere, brought in priests to bless the camp. They've worked hard to make the camp feel safe, to create an air bubble of protection around it. Every week we have opening and closing campfires at a special spot. It's considered sacred, a place with incredibly positive energy. It feels like a dome of protection is centered there. Last summer, being young and foolish, I and 3 other staff members played with the Ouija board. It took a while, but we think we connected with something. It said it wanted to hurt one of the boys with us. It seemed like we were safe because it couldn't come onto the actual campgrounds, and oddly, it mostly responded to me. When asked if it liked me, it responded with 666. I still don't understand what that meant. Across the camp, there's another area we call Grassland Grove. Over the years, stories have built up about the Grassland Ghost. It started with a man who got lost hiking that area before there was a proper trail. He eventually died out there alone, and because his passing was so lonely and terrible, his ghost is said to be very angry, upset, and gives off bad energy. Of course, when staff or campers go out into the woods at night or on trips and weird things happen, a lot of it gets blamed on the Grassland Ghost. It could just be animals, creaky trees, your mind playing tricks in the dark. After all, who knows what's really out there deep in the woods? But others, myself included, based on experiences, believe it's the Grassland Ghost, that it likes to feed off your fear and nervous energy. Okay, now for the main story. About midway through last summer, during the 4th week, I was working in the kitchen with a good friend. We finished washing the dishes after lunch and had about 3 hours free before we had to start dinner prep. An idea popped into my head. Hey, I asked my friend, want to try and find that meth lab outing spot? They were up for it. The problem was none of us actually knew how to get there exactly. Nobody really visited that spot anymore. Part of it was because a government weather station and an oil pipeline had been built nearby, making it officially off-limits or just awkward to access. The other part was its general creepiness. People just felt uncomfortable going there. However, some of the older staff who had been there years ago had given me rough directions. They warned me not to go, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. I scare easily, but I've always been fascinated by abandoned places and paranormal stories. So we grabbed some bear spray, just in case, a backpack, our water bottles, and headed towards the creek we used every day. We floated downstream, crossed the creek 3 times, as the directions suggested. We were a little lost after the crossings, looking for a path. I finally spotted something that looked like an old trail not too far off. We hiked up to it and made our way through the trees. Next, we came into a clearing. It looked like it had been used as a drivable path many years ago, maybe even somewhat recently, but it clearly wasn't used regularly now. We kept walking, following what seemed like old truck tracks. We found the government weather station across the clearing. The truck tracks kept going, so I felt like we were on the right way. At the end of the clearing, the trees started up again, growing right in front of the truck path. There was no way a vehicle could have gotten past this point recently. The trees were blocking it completely. It was at this point that things started to really feel genuinely creepy, eerie. Everything seemed to go silent. The grass was taller here. An old, out-of-use barbed wire fence ran next to us. My friend had been playing music on his speaker to keep our spirits up and distract from the walk. But even with the music, the atmosphere felt wrong. We kept walking down this narrow path. It felt like walking along a cleared line for power lines where all the trees have been cut back in a straight path. But this was smaller, narrower, just slightly wider than a truck. Walking through this section was very unsettling. It only got worse as we went deeper into the bush. The only feeling I got from this place was something bad. But being silly teenagers, we pushed on. We reached the end of the old trucking pathway. It led to what I'd call an extremely small ridge. Just in front of us, the pathway seemed to continue downwards, though it wasn't very obvious. To our right, another path seemed to go off that way. I walked closer to the ridge to get a look. It was here I noticed some really old footprints and a faded blue ground tarp. Looking around, we saw chopped up wood pieces, and in a clearing nearby, a very obvious fire pit made of large stones. I touched the charcoal. It didn't feel recent, maybe used a week ago at most. My friend, feeling nervous, just wanted to head back to camp and stayed put about 10 feet behind me in the clearing. We were running out of time to explore anyway. We had to be back for kitchen duty soon. As we stepped back onto the familiar paths closer to camp, I felt a wave of relief. We finally felt safe again. My friend then told me something eerie. When we had reached the creepy part of the pathway, just after the field, they had heard a man's voice yelling or calling at us from behind. They had just ignored it and turned the music up louder. I hadn't heard anything. However, I wasn't satisfied with our short exploration. I needed more answers. I vowed to return later that night. Night fell. All the campers were asleep, and it was staff free time, except for those on duty. The woods are much scarier at night. We wanted to bring more people this time. Not a huge group, but not just the two of us. 4 felt like a good number for an adventure. I invited another person working in the kitchen with us, plus a guy who was one of the counselors for the youngest kids that week. I trusted this guy a lot. Despite his young age, he had been through a lot more in life than most of us, and seemed grounded. I told the 2 new people about our earlier trip, how we hadn't found much, but how creepy it felt. Then we set off, armed with flashlights this time, searching for whatever was beyond where we'd stopped. We went back to where the paths split, near the fire pit. The one going downwards hadn't seemed prominent earlier, but it looked a little clearer now. We decided to take the pathway that went to the right first. This path got smaller and smaller as we went. To the side were many old abandoned shelter bases that just the frames or skeletons of lean-tos from years ago. We kept going, thinking we are on the right track. It wasn't as eerie as the start of the pathway by the field, but it was still unsettling in the dark. The pathway eventually led to a dead end, turning into something that looked like a game trail that just disappeared into thick bush. We turned around and headed back to the start, to the fire pit clearing where the paths forked. This time, we went down the not-so-obvious downwards pathway. This led us to success. After about 5 minutes of walking through some broken trees that definitely gave off Blair Witch vibes, we finally reached the tag-along trailer. We got excited seeing the outline in our flashlight beams and approached it to explore. It was very old and covered in bullet holes. The exit holes on the other side were huge. There was even a literal paper target sheet taped to it, riddled with bullet marks. It was unsettling. Why was it there? Who had used it? Inside, we found one of those gray foldable tables you see at parties, overturned. It seemed out of place. We also found a small frog, which lightened the mood slightly. Thinking we hadn't found the actual meth lab or the bathtub yet, we kept going. We went around fallen trees and crossed a small creek. On the other side, we found a prominent but extremely old-looking dirt trail. We stepped onto this path. About 10 steps in, we looked at our watches. It was 10 p.m. We had until 11 p.m. free time. We decided to be safe and turn around now, heading back to camp before it got super dark and our free time was up. None of us wanted to be out in the woods that late with whatever might be out there. That was the farthest I had ever been into those woods. I didn't go back to that specific point again that summer. Nothing overtly scary happened on that night trip, but the place felt heavy, charged with a bad history. During the summer, there are 8 weeks of camp sessions. This story took place during week 4. Now, we're going to skip forward to the end of weekend 8, the last week of the summer. Since my trip to the trailer, I had been curious about that spot and what might lie beyond it, or what the strange energy was about. I didn't get another chance to return during the week as the days got shorter and it got dark earlier, and most people refused to go to that area because of its bad energy. It wasn't until week 8 that I had another chance to make the return journey. This week, I was back working in the kitchen. Midway through the week, the 3 other kitchen staff members and I were out at the creek chilling during the day. We were swimming and watching salamanders downstream with some kids, just messing around and cooling off. We ended up floating down the creek until we reached the spot 3 creek crossings downstream, the place where you had to cross to get to that strange outing spot. This was the edge of the main camp's forest land, bordered by a fence marking the park's property line. The 4 of us were just sitting on the rocks by the water. I was looking around, observing the area. If you were facing downstream, the hiking path to the outing spot was to your right across the fence, into the parkland. I looked up beyond the hill that was on the left, and I noticed a clearing of trees. Suddenly a thought struck me. Could this have been the road the trailer could have been brought in on from the main road to get to this odd, secluded spot? Everything seemed to line up. One of the other staff and I got up and went to explore this idea, ducking beneath the fence into the parkland. The other two stayed by the creek, still chilling. What happened here, I'm still trying to explain. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it. The best way I can describe it is we entered a time warp, or maybe a kind of localized twilight zone. The two of us walked towards what looked like an old roadbed leading up the hill. I wanted answers, especially after my previous eerie adventure. I needed to piece together all the strange knowledge and evidence I had in my mind. We were at the bottom of what looked like a loose gravel road before it reached the shallow creek water. I'm not sure what it was, maybe a strange urge, a call of the void, of curiosity? But the urge to explore overcame me. I ran up this loose gravel road towards the top of the hill, while my friend just walked up behind me. I ran ahead of her, past where she could see me. At the top there was a path that seemed to have come from nowhere, and led to nowhere visible from there. But I was right, this secret road did seem to come off a main road further back, although I couldn't see it clearly from where I was. I didn't have enough time to explore further to see exactly where it connected or what was down the path at the top. I turned around, intending to head back. I heard my friend call my name once. She sounded far away, like she was just coming up to the middle of the road I had run up. I called back to her, but she didn't answer. Thinking we were leaving, that it was time to go back, I started walking back down the road towards the creek to meet the other two staff who were packing up. I yelled over to them, asking if my friend was with them. They didn't respond. They couldn't hear me over the water. Thinking she was with them, I started walking back the way we came. But behind me I heard yelling. I couldn't make out what was being said, but it sounded like my friend from far away. I yelled back again, but got no answer. I turned, facing the road I had just come down, and I saw my friend coming down the road towards me. She looked confused. She thought I had been hiding and pranking her by running ahead. I hadn't. I was confused, and she was too. She told me she had walked up the road after me, called my name about 3 times, and heard no answer. She heard me call out the first time, she said, but thought I was further up, so she continued up the pathway at the top to see if I was there. She said she thought I was gone. Only a few seconds later, she said I heard me calling her name again, but this time I sounded like I was in a completely different location, back at the bottom of the road. She had thought I just left her and headed back to camp. Here's what I think happened. I think for a few minutes we entered some kind of dimensional or time warp. It doesn't sound like much on paper, but if you think about it logically, we should have seen each other. She was coming up the road looking for me at the same time I was heading back down the road. We should have crossed paths, or at least seen each other clearly. Yet neither of us did, and we both felt like we were up on that road searching and calling for what felt like an hour, when in reality, only about 5 minutes had passed back at the creek. We both swore we weren't pranking each other. We were both genuinely confused and a little scared. Something strange happened there. We went back to camp and told the older staff about it. They agreed it was off-putting, especially combined with the other strange occurrences in that area. None of us felt like we were making it up. The next night, which was a Wednesday night, I brought a group back to the outing spot. This was our last week at camp, our last chance to explore together. The only one who had gone with me before was the guy counselor. I felt he needed to be there. It was a group of about 7, mostly just wanting to mess around and see the creepy spot. We hiked over the offsetting paths past the field and started yelling and singing loudly. One of the people with us, a guy named Jay, had actually experienced this outing spot when it was still actively used by the camp years ago.
We came to the fork in the pathway where the old fire pit and the rumored meth lab trailer should have been. It was just gone, cleared, like it had vanished. Where did it go? Where, how, could it just disappear? We still didn't know. It was getting dark again, and we didn't have enough time to carry on exploring the paths further. So we turned back, heading down the eerie path back towards camp. One of the sillier guys in the group ran ahead, making weird noises, trying to hide and scare us. He did manage to scare us when we caught up to him. But just then, the fence right beside me made multiple loud noises, like something hitting it or pushing against it. And the guy who was ahead trying to scare us saw something. He said something 4 feet tall jumped the fence right by us and ran into the woods. Maybe it was a deer, but considering the bad energy I sense from that area, I think it was something else. I managed to catch the noise on video, not whatever ran off. We got back to camp pretty freaked out, needless to say. We had no intention of going back to that spot anytime soon after that. This was Wednesday night. Friday was our last night at camp. While meal prepping for the final dinner, one of the senior staff girls walked into the kitchen. She was pretty spiritual, and she said she just felt the urge to come in and help. I asked her about the Twilight Zone experience at the creek spot, hoping she might be able to offer some insight. She said it was funny I asked because she had been having her own strange spiritual experiences recently.
After a big discussion about the whole summer, sharing all our weird experiences, she told me she sensed I was spiritual. There's no way to describe this other than being able to sense if people or things have good or bad energy. As I said earlier, I was the only one who had initially sensed the bad energy at the outing spot back on the first trip. Another senior staff member came in, and she was also quite spiritual. She said the last time she was in the general area, not at the actual outing spot but near the creek crossings, she sensed something was wrong and had all the kids turn their tops away from that direction, away from the direction of the outing spot. This happened to be the night I was playing with the Ouija board the previous summer. After this discussion, I felt the strong need to go up to the special campfire spot, the one with the good energy. I wanted to think about everything and be surrounded by positive energy. Once I got there, I found Jay, the guy who had been to the outing spot years ago, creating the firewood pile for the closing campfire. I agreed to help and went off to find sticks nearby. The forest floor was soft with moss. I had taken my shoes off, and if you walked carefully, you wouldn't get hurt. I went up the slight hill nearby to gather sticks. There was a small, almost invisible pathway leading up. I followed it, losing it at some points, but eventually it led to a kind of normal path. Not a clear hiking trail, but like a path created by people walking through tall grass over and over again. I kept following it until I reached the very top of the steep hill. It led to a small clearing. The pathway continued beyond this, and I knew for a fact it hadn't been used in a really long time. I had no idea where it went. But I had the urge to stop there. I stood in the clearing and yelled out into the trees, asking for answers. I said I was there, and if life or whatever was out there wanted to tell me something, now was its chance. I sat down on the ground and waited. Nothing happened. A few minutes passed. I got up and started heading back down the path, back toward the campfire. Walking back down was painful. There were sticks and roots digging into my bare feet that somehow hadn't bothered me on the way up. But as I walked, I felt it. Not like I was being followed, but as if something was right there in my presence. I still don't know what it was. On the way down, I found some old blue electrical wiring in the ground. It looked completely out of place. I tried to pull it out, but it was buried deep. I don't know how it got there, deep in the woods with nothing around except hiking trails. I gave up trying to pull it out and went back down the hill, back to camp for the last dinner. This is where the story ends. Nothing happened after that night.
I still feel the need to get answers about the outing spot, about the strange road, about the energy. We did a deep clean of the camp the next day. All the campers went home, and I drove off with 3 other staff members to drop them off at their houses. As I drove by the main road, near where the secret road to the meth lab spot turned off, the area where I experienced that time warp feeling, I said out loud that something bad was going to happen there eventually. I felt uneasy, bad vibes as I got closer to that turnoff. But once we passed it, everything felt fine again. Someone told me once that those who seek will not find. Maybe that's why I never got any clear answers while exploring those pathways beyond the campfire. Why the story of the outing spot remains unsettling and incomplete.
When I was very young, maybe around 7 years old, my parents told me not to go into the woods behind our house. They said it was dangerous, that there were wild animals that could hurt me, and that I should always stay within the garden area. There was a small fence that marked the edge of our property and separated it from the woods. For the most part, I did what I was told, but being a curious kid, one day, curiosity got the better of me. I remember my father was cooking in the kitchen, and my mother must have been upstairs doing something. I don't remember exactly what. The urge to see what was in the woods just for a moment was too strong. I opened the little gate in the fence and stepped through, making my way across the grass towards the trees. I told myself I wouldn't be long, just a quick peek, and I'd be back before my parents even noticed I was gone. The woods were cool, shaded, a lot different from the sunny garden. From my bedroom window, I could see a fairly long way into them, but there were parts I had never seen before. The further I got from the fence, the more interesting everything seemed. I was getting deeper in, ignoring the little voice telling me to turn back. I saw something shiny on the ground ahead of me. My 7-year-old brain immediately thought it was treasure. I hurried over to collect it. It was a coin. I think a dime. I was thrilled. In my young mind, that was a large amount of currency. I immediately told myself there must be more money scattered around, so I kept looking, scanning the ground, stepping further and further into the woods. And that's where my downfall happened. While I was looking down, searching for more coins, I failed to see a tree root sticking out of the ground. It was right in my path. I tripped over it and tumbled head first. I didn't just fall onto the ground, I tumbled deep into a ditch that was hidden by leaves and undergrowth. I must have fallen at least 5 feet down. I was tangled up between fallen leaves, branches, and rocks at the bottom. My arm hurt like hell. It was an immediate, sharp, agonizing pain. I started screaming. I tried to move, to get up, but the pain in my arm was unbearable. I can't even begin to describe how much it hurt. Despite the pain, I somehow managed to stumble to my feet in the bottom of the ditch. That's when I realized I was in serious trouble. My arm was either broken or badly injured. Without 2 working arms, there was no way I was going to be able to climb out of this hole. It was too deep. The sides were too steep. I was stuck. I started screaming again, yelling for my parents, for help. I screamed for what felt like hours. The sun started to get lower in the sky. Panic set in. I was alone, hurt, trapped, and it was getting dark. Finally, just before dark, I heard it. My parents were calling my name. Their voices sounded worried, a little frantic. I shouted back, screaming as loud as I could, telling them where I was. They found the ditch. Instead of scolding me for disobeying and going into the woods, they immediately focused on getting me out. My dad had to jump down into the ditch first. Together, they helped me, pulling and supporting me, getting me out of the hole. They rushed me to the nearest hospital. It turned out I had fractured my arm, in a couple of different places. I had also hurt my back significantly, which I hadn't even fully noticed at the time because of the arm pain. And I had a collection of smaller cuts and bruises all over my body from the fall. The doctor told my parents that they were very lucky to have found me when they did. Staying there overnight, exposed and injured, could have led to serious complications, maybe even something life-threatening, especially for a child. After that day, I definitely understood why my parents had told me to stay out of the woods. I realized that exploring alone could be genuinely dangerous. I didn't go back into those woods for a long time, not until I was about 15, an angsty teenager who needed a place to vent and think. But even then, I never went as far back as I did that first time. The memory of the fall, the pain, the feeling of being trapped and alone in that ditch as darkness approached, stayed with me. Please, keep an eye on your kids, people. Teach them about the dangers. My life could have ended up a whole lot different if my parents hadn't found me when they did. That one moment of curiosity, that one fall, could have had far worse consequences. I was hanging out with a guy I knew from my small rural town. There wasn't much to do there. Our usual entertainment involved driving around on the old country roads, listening to music, and eventually finding a quiet spot to park and talk. We called it road riding, and it was just what everyone did. We were driving down a narrow one-lane road when he turned onto a gravel road. The gravel soon disappeared, turning into a dirt track. Then the dirt road faded until it was just 2 tire tracks winding ahead of us into the woods. I asked him if he knew where he was going. He seemed confident, assuring me he had been going to this spot for years. He was a creative guy, always writing music, working on projects. We kept driving down the tire tracks. It was getting darker as we went further into the trees. We finally reached a clearing. At this point, you couldn't even see anything resembling a road anymore. We were truly in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense woods. Once we parked, he turned the music down low. We started talking. What began as a conversation about life and relationships eventually shifted to deeper topics, higher powers, enlightenment, the nature of reality. He was talking about how limited most people's thinking seemed, how he believed there was so much more to existence than what we could see or understood. It was about 1 or 2 in the morning by this point. It was pitch black outside. We had turned off the headlights, and the only light came from the dim glow of the radio screen playing softly in the background. As he was talking, I started to feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. For no reason. I wasn't scared by what he was saying. I actually found it pretty interesting. But the air started to feel different, heavy somehow. And my body became intensely aware that we were not alone in that clearing. Something else was there with us. The atmosphere around us felt electric, like something was building, manifesting itself. It was a totally unnatural feeling, something I had never experienced before. The entire area seemed to succumb to an overwhelming sense of malice, a heavy, dark energy. About 30 seconds after I felt this distinct shift, he stopped talking. He looked at me, his eyes wide in the dim light. "Can you feel that?" he whispered. I couldn't even speak. My throat felt tight. I just nodded, my eyes wide too. The moment I nodded, the entire clearing was instantly lit up. Not like headlights turning on or a flashlight beam. It was a brilliant, bright flash of light, like a silent lightning strike directly overhead, but it lasted longer. The whole clearing was illuminated for a good 5 seconds before the light slowly faded back into darkness. And it was steady. It didn't flicker like a fire or a bad light bulb. It was just pure, intense light filling the space. We stared at each other in stunned panic. "Get out of here!" I finally managed to shout, the words tearing from my throat.
He fumbled with the ignition, trying to start the car to drive away. The whole time I felt this crushing sense of impending doom. I have never felt more like I was about to die than I did at that moment, and there wasn't even anything visible threatening us. I've dealt with anxiety my whole life, so I know what it's like to feel unnecessarily helpless, to have my fight or flight reflexes trigger randomly, but this was different. This wasn't anxiety, this was a response to a real, terrifying presence. It was the scariest moment of my life. One minute I was feeling happy, sitting in a car with this guy, and the next I was fighting back sobs of terror. We made it out of the clearing, driving back the way we came. Once we reached the main road, he finally spoke, his voice shaky. "What was that?" All I could do was shake my head. "I don't know," I whispered. He drove me home, and we never spoke about it again. This is the first time I've brought it up since that night, and even thinking about it makes me feel that same cold dread, that sense of being overwhelmed. I legitimately feel terrified and clam up every time I start to tell someone about it. I feel like whatever was in that clearing with us did not want us there. It did not like that we were talking about the things we were talking about, and it gave us a warning. I should also mention the radio turned off the exact moment the light filled the clearing, and when he tried to start the car to drive away, it acted like the battery was dead for a moment before finally turning over. We had been parked for long, maybe 20 minutes, so there was no way the car should have died. It seemed incredibly coincidental that it happened the exact moment that impossible light flashed. It was a brand new car. It felt like whatever was there wanted to stop us, to trap us. That silent, powerful light was a message, and I received it loud and clear.
I live in Victoria, Australia. We don't get much snow down where I am unless you drive way up into the mountain areas where the climate is a lot colder. Because of this, I rarely saw snow in person growing up. So once a year, my mom and I would visit my papa up in the mountains in a place called Glen Alden. He'd drive us out to a nearby mountain, and we'd get to play in the little bit of snow we could find. It was never a lot, just patches here and there, but we loved it. I have a distinct memory from those trips of feeling nauseous from the winding, bending mountain roads, my ears constantly popping from the altitude changes. And I'll never forget the fear that our car would somehow swerve off the narrow road and plummet down the cliff. Good times. It was on one of these trips that my mom and I went on a short hike through a beautiful green forest high up in the mountains. I don't remember the exact name of the location. I was probably only around 8 to 11 years old at the time. There wasn't much snow, just the usual patches, but it was beautiful, quiet, and there was no one else around as far as we could see. I can't recall why it was just the two of us that day. My papa did have someone staying with him for a short time then, so maybe my mom just wanted a break. I remember feeling so content, so peaceful in that moment. We were just enjoying the walk, the fresh mountain air, the quiet of the forest. And then suddenly it hit us, a feeling, a heavy, overwhelming sense of impending doom and danger. It wasn't a sound or a sight, just a pure, gut-deep feeling. It was like a cold, sinking weight in my chest. We stood there, bewildered, looking around. The feeling was intense, immediate. It felt like we didn't belong there, like we should leave, immediately run away. Keep in mind, this was broad daylight, not night. I had been in Scouts for most of my childhood and felt comfortable and familiar in this kind of environment. Yet here we were, feeling a sudden, inexplicable terror, frantically scanning the trees around us for the source of this dread. It felt like we were being watched, not just by one pair of eyes, but 1,000 judgmental eyes,
unseen, hidden within the dense forest, all gazing upon us. The feeling was so intimidating, so powerful. I remember my heart started beating rapidly, my body shaking slightly just from the sheer force of the dread. We quickly turned around and paced back towards Papa's car. We didn't run, not exactly, but our walk was fast, urgent. There were no sounds of branches snapping behind us, no ominous figure stepping out from behind trees, no growling sounds. This wasn't something physical we could point to, it was just the feeling. But the feeling was so strong, so real, it propelled us out of there. Later, I asked my mom about that day, asking her to describe what she felt or saw. She remembers having an image in her head, a fleeting sense of a large creature, something huge and ancient, crawling up the mountain towards us. She felt as if this presence was carried on the wind. Every big gust, it would come closer and closer. There was a nagging voice in her mind, she said, an urgent command telling her to leave, to get out, over and over, getting louder the longer we stayed there. It sounds a bit dramatic when she describes it, but it was her interpretation of the same profound dread we both felt. Fortunately, nothing else happened that day. We made it back to the car safely and carried on with the rest of our trip. For years, I thought I was the only one who remembered that experience. I just assumed it was all in my head, a product of my own anxiety as a child, that my mind had exaggerated a simple moment of unease. However, it was only a couple of years ago that my mom brought it up, completely out of the blue. She asked me, "Do you remember that time we went for a walk on a mountain and we both felt like something was watching us and we had to leave right away?" My jaw dropped. It was real. It hadn't just been me. She remembered it too. Realizing that she had felt the exact same inexplicable terror, the same overwhelming dread, confirmed that it did really happen. It makes me feel strangely happy in a way, because I've always craved experiencing something genuinely paranormal or unexplained in my life, but I've had very little luck. Maybe it's my skeptical nature that prevents me from fully accepting that our world might be a lot more supernatural, a lot stranger than we usually perceive it to be. But that day in the mountains, the day the dread hit us like a physical force, the day the forest felt alive and watching, that was real, and it was terrifying.
This happened fairly recently. My boyfriend and I decided to spend a night camping, just to get away from everything and enjoy being outdoors. We found a quiet spot, set up our tent, got comfortable, and went to sleep. It must have been around 4 a.m. when I was woken up by rustling noises near our tent. There are a lot of large animals where we live, so I wasn't sure exactly what it could be. A deer, a raccoon, maybe something bigger. Being the curious person I am, I glanced at my watch and knew it had to be an animal at that hour. I didn't want it getting too close to the tent, maybe trying to chew on the material or something, so I thought I'd quietly sneak my head out and try to scare it away. I felt reasonably safe. I knew there weren't supposed to be any dangerous animals in this specific area. So I sat up, quietly unzipped the tent flap, and peered outside into the dark. I didn't see anything at first, but I listened intently. Then I heard it again, a small animal moving closer. The footfalls on the leaves were more pronounced now. I looked around behind our tent, trying to see where it was coming from. Just as I located the sound, I heard it run off into the distance. Okay, I thought, that's that. It must have seen me or heard me and gotten scared. I pulled the tent flap closed, zipped it back up quietly, and made my way back to my sleeping bag next to my snoring boyfriend. He hadn't even stirred. He's a very heavy sleeper. I tried going back to sleep, but now there was an uneasiness in the air. I felt uncomfortable. Part of me tried to convince myself it was just the awkward feeling of sleeping on the hard ground in a tent, or maybe the material of the tent pressing in on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. That brief encounter, even though nothing happened, had unsettled me. Something felt wrong now. Unable to sleep, and knowing it was almost 5 a.m. and the first hint of light would appear soon, I decided I would just sit up inside the tent by the door and listen. Maybe I could scare away anything else that came near. Hopefully by the time it was fully light out, I would feel safe enough to try and sleep again. So I sat there in the dark tent, listening, waiting for the first rays of sunrise to offer some comfort. And then the rustling returned. The footfalls came back, but this time they were faster, more rushed. I looked around, trying to see through the tent walls, but still couldn't make anything out. I listened intently, and after about 5 minutes of silence, I thought it had gone again. But that's when I heard it. It wasn't just outside the tent or off in the distance. It was right behind me. I quickly turned my head, snapping it around in the confined space of the tent, and I saw something. It was a man. He was on all fours, close to the ground, wearing dirty clothes. He was moving in a strange, scuttling way. He almost looked like a rat. He had a creepy smile on his face. He straightened up, stood on his legs, and in an instant he turned and ran off into the woods, disappearing behind a nearby tree. He hid there, just behind the tree, and started speaking, his voice low and taunting, like I hadn't noticed him, like this was some kind of game. I just about soiled myself. Panic seized me. "Martin!" I yelled, trying to wake my boyfriend. "Martin, wake up!" He didn't stir. I kept screaming his name, needing to get his attention. This creep, this rat man in rags, was just standing there behind the tree, staring at me with a hungry look in his eyes. I wanted this person to know I wasn't alone, that if he tried anything, there would be consequences. Finally, I heard a very groggy sound from my boyfriend inside the tent. He was waking up. I was getting angry now. I really needed his help. "Martin, get out here now! There's a strange man outside!" The words "strange man outside" seemed to cut through his sleep. He shot out of the tent. What I hadn't realized was that my boyfriend likes to sleep completely naked when we camp. So there he was, standing outside the tent, naked, facing the woods, with Ratman staring at us from behind the tree. Not that my boyfriend seemed to notice the nakedness. He was completely focused on the creepy figure. I pointed in the direction of the strange man. My boyfriend was still rubbing his eyes, adjusting to the dark, and couldn't see him clearly yet. As he squinted into the trees, we heard it again. The sound of the man running. He was gone from behind the tree. My boyfriend, now fully awake and angry, started yelling, "Hey, get back here! Come here and face us like a man!" At that moment, the rat man came running towards my boyfriend from a different direction. He was holding a stick. My boyfriend just managed to avoid being hit in the head. The man somehow tripped or stumbled just as he reached us. My boyfriend didn't hesitate. He took the opportunity, pinned him down on the ground, and punched him in the face a few times. "What the hell are you doing out here? Trying to scare us in the middle of the night?" The rat man didn't say anything. He just spit in my boyfriend's face. Enraged, my boyfriend stood up, kicked him, and told him to leave. "Get out of here, and if you ever come anywhere near this clearing again, there'll be hell to pay." The creep slowly got up, looking dazed, and walked away into the distance, disappearing into the woods. He looked back once, swearing under his breath, but we couldn't understand his words. None of us had any idea what he was doing out there in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere.
dressed in rags and acting like that. We were too afraid at that point to stay any longer or try to investigate. We quickly packed up our stuff, stuffing everything into our bags, and left as fast as we could, just as the first rays of sunshine were breaking through the darkness. To this day, I still don't like camping much. And Ratman, wherever you are, let's definitely not meet again.
I grew up way up north, in the parts of Canada where the wild still feels untamed. These days, I live in the big city, but back then, my world was mostly trees and sky. I was often on my own out there, learning the language of the forest, the difference between a gentle whisper of leaves and a warning rustle. And I knew, deep down, that there was something living in my grandfather's woods that didn't fit the rules. Something fundamentally unnatural that I was too afraid to ever truly seek out. My grandfather, Philip, though everyone but me called him Phil, a name he strangely disliked, passed away a couple of years back. He'd been in a care home for a while, but the last few months were particularly difficult. He was my best friend when I was a kid. A massive man with kind, brilliant blue eyes and a surprising fondness for the color pink. He wasn't my blood relation. My birth grandfather died young. My grandmother met Phil as a widow. She didn't know much about him at first, only that he was smart, had siblings he looked out for, and owned a considerable piece of land not too far off. He worked hard for the town, building roads, that sort of thing. He and my grandmother, a spirited woman who didn't waste time on anything she didn't care for, hit it off immediately. She had 3 kids already, my mother and 2 uncles. Phil was good with them, treated them well, but he never let them come to his place. Only my grandmother visited, until I came along in '92. I was a bit of a handful, born out of circumstance more than planning. But for some reason, Phil loved me like his own flesh and blood. He was one of the only people who truly paid attention to me. My mother was often preoccupied, passing me off to whomever would take me. I remember her visits less than I remember the time spent in the woods. Phil and my grandmother never married, and he'd never been married before or had other children. Sometimes my grandmother and I would drive the hour-long journey to spend the day at Phil's property. It was a huge section of family land, like ours, but set back from the coast, along a winding river that gave the nearest small village its name. The original family home had been swallowed by a massive flood years before, after Phil inherited the land as a young man. The old house was still underwater, lost to the lake that formed, collapsing long before I was born. Instead of trying to reclaim it, my grandfather built a new house and a few small outbuildings nearby. He left the new lake where it was, let the old place sink, and never spoke about it. When I stayed with him, Phil taught me things, practical things, how to grow vegetables, which plants in the forest were safe to eat, how to purify water, what animal tracks meant, how to tell the difference between the sounds of foxes and coyotes. The sounds of the lake at night were nothing to fear, he'd say. He taught me about the trees around us, how to care for the chickens and pigs we raised, treating them with respect. He shared quiet wisdom. But he also taught me other things. He told me that birch trees could scream when the wind blew just right, a sound like a steady, gut-wrenching shriek, and if I ever heard that sound and the wind wasn't blowing, I was to go home immediately. He warned me that the smell of rotting meat in the woods usually meant danger, and that I should never, ever walk off the established trails. He stressed the rule about never staying out past dark, especially near the camp area or the surrounding paths. He pointed out an old, rusty scythe embedded in the branches of a large oak tree near one of the outbuildings.
It was so old the tree had grown around it, holding it fused and vaguely threatening in its boughs, and that, he said, was for protection. Looking at satellite images of the area now, before they were widely available back then, you can see how isolated his property was. Miles and miles of dense woods between the scattered roads. There were no other buildings visible, just trees. The neighbors and the few scattered properties were always strangers to me. People rented those places for a few months at a time, a constant stream of unfamiliar faces. Nobody ever stayed long. I remember several of them losing pets over the years. Dogs and cats didn't seem to fare well there. Their bodies would sometimes turn up later, seemingly left in strange places, sometimes in trees, sometimes on doorsteps, or even in the rusted-out cars my grandfather kept near the camp. One property belonged to his only nephew, a man named Kenneth. Kenneth was ordinary, married to a teacher in a nearby town. They weren't around often. They didn't have children. My grandfather's property included his house, the walking trails, and the camp area, which even had a small, morbid pet graveyard off to the side. The summer I turned 7, in '98, my mother showed up unexpectedly at Phil's place. She hadn't called, didn't know the way, and got lost several times trying to find the road. Phil was visibly startled when we arrived. I'd never been there without my grandmother, and it turned out she was out of town. But my mother was insistent and left me with my granddad with little consideration. Night was starting to fall, and I remember Phil seemed unusually anxious. He was rushing around, herding the chickens into their barn, making sure the cats were locked inside the workshop with the young pigs we were raising. I watched him through the mudroom window, standing on tippy-toes, seeing him pause sometimes to wipe sweat from his forehead, even though it wasn't that hot. The air felt still, thick with the rising chorus of peepers and bullfrogs from the lake. They were so close that their calls became a solid wall of sound, the only thing you could really hear in the clean evening air. I loved that sound. It still brings back good memories. Finally, just before dark, he came inside and made us a simple dinner of venison and potatoes. We went to bed soon after. This felt strange. Usually we'd stay up late watching old movies, but he just said he was tired, and the early nights were good. I went to the spare room. The house was small, single story, no attic, just a crawl space. There were only 5 rooms. The mudroom, with the only outside door, a kitchen that led into an open living area, his bedroom, a small bathroom in the spare room where I slept, all arranged in a rough T shape. There were only a few windows, one in his room facing the front, and 2 in my room, one above the bed and one along the song. I lay in my familiar bed, the loud silence of the frogs filling the room through the open screened windows. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep. It was the deep of night, maybe just past 2 in the morning. My clock's light was visible from where I was. I wasn't fully awake, but I registered 2 things at once. My grandfather roughly pulling me off the bed and onto the wooden floor beside it, and someone knocking persistently on the front door. He was huge compared to me, and he lay down on top of me, covering my mouth with his large, rough hand, hushing me with the other. I saw his face in the moonlight, pale, his eyes wide, looking like a terrified child. Then I realized the frogs had gone silent. The sudden absence of their noise was deafening, more unnerving than their calls had been. The knocking continued, loud and insistent, a pattern of 3 sharp raps, then a short, impatient pause, then 3 more. And then I heard a voice from the front of the house. It was eerily calm, distant, almost hollow. "Philip, it's me, your nephew, Kenneth." That's when a real knot of fear tightened in my stomach. I didn't know Phil well enough to use Philip. Nobody did. He hated it. Everyone called him Phil right up until the end. hearing that voice, that weirdly clear, emotionless voice, call him by the wrong name, and then claim to be Kenneth, jolly, booming-voiced Kenneth with the charmingly misspelled name on everything. Whatever it was at the door, it wasn't him. I heard it tap against the glass of my grandfather's bedroom window, closer now. Again, the same call in that clean crystal voice. "Philip, it's me, your nephew, Kenneth." After a moment, I heard whatever it was step down off the porch and start walking, following the side of the house. My grandfather held his breath, pressing down harder on me, his hand covering most of my eyes, still hushing me. I could just barely make out the blue light of the screen above me, but I could hear everything. It walked slowly, in even, unhurried pace, pausing once at the lower window to tap again. "Philip, I know you're in there. It's me, your nephew. Let me in." We stayed there frozen on the floor for a long time. My body ached from the hard wood, my grandfather's weight heavy on me, my breath held tight. It felt like an eternity. Finally, after what felt like forever, the dark shape moved away from the screen. I heard that same slow, even pace resume, moving back along the side of the house and then simply gone. As quickly and silently as it had arrived. My grandfather waited for a while longer, tense and listening. Slowly, cautiously, he got up and helped me back into bed. He didn't say a word. He just closed the window, sealing out the night air before going to sit in the dark kitchen. Slowly, the sounds of the frogs returned, filling the silence left behind. At some point, as the first light of morning began to creep through the windows, I finally fell asleep. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the ATV being started outside. I jumped up, still sore from lying on the floor, and ran to the door. I saw my grandfather pulling out of the yard, heading toward the forest trail. He was moving slowly, pulling a small cart behind him. There was a blue industrial tarp draped over the back of the cart. I quickly pulled on some boots and went outside, hoping to see where he was going. I ended up standing near the barn and workshop beside the thresher, right by the big oak tree where the scythe was embedded. I stood there, and for some reason I looked up, and I saw it. Our pig, the young one we'd been raising, was staring blankly down at me from a new perch beside the scythe. My grandfather had butchered the pig. He'd taken its body somewhere into the woods, and he'd left its head in the tree. I didn't scream. I wanted to, desperately. My throat felt tight, sealed shut by shocked, silent terror. For the rest of that day, my grandfather acted like nothing had happened. He pretended not to know what I was talking about when I asked where he'd gone or where the pig had gone. We ate lunch and dinner, went to bed early. The night was quiet, uneventful. The next morning, I went outside again. I felt like I was moving on autopilot, drawn back to the oak tree. As I stepped out, I saw something below the tree, the one that had held the pig's head. It looked at first like someone had left a pile of green leaves. I walked closer, and it became terrifyingly clear. The pig's head was gone. In its place was a mound of pale green moth wings, Luna moth wings, piles of them ankle-deep stacked against the base of the tree. There were no bodies, just loose wings. And pig's blood still stained the bark, running down the trunk.
My grandmother came for me that night. I spent most of the day crying, just waiting for her arrival. I never went back to that place after that day, not once in almost 20 years. The memory fills me with dread, a profound horror. My grandfather died 2 years ago. Last January would have been 3. He left me the property. I feel like I'm supposed to go back there. Like I'm supposed to return and face whatever came looking for him that night. I don't know what to do. Any advice is more than welcome.